We need plastic cups.
Yeah, those are clean, but they were put out.
Are these recyclable, Paul?
Yes, they are, but,
Okay, so that was a confusion.
but they were all put out, all one
It's
eighty.
still under your control.
We have new
Very true.
Oh,
Thanks. Do you guys need any?
Go find the blue buckets.
go team.
You need one?
One way to look at it.
No, that's yours. You got my water bottle.
I need some,
You need some water?
put some gin in there.
I don't have any gin.
Vodka?
I don't have any of that either.
You guys ready?
Shouldn't have.
Drink it straight out.
Good evening. It's 7 o'clock. Let's call to order this meeting of November 4th, 2019. Please join me with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So we're going to start off with our public service announcements. You want me to read it, or you want to do them?
Okay, we have a proclamation for Veterans Day, Monday, November 19th, 2019. Whereas November 11th was the day on which the armistice ending World War I was signed, and whereas this day has been set aside to commemorate the men and women of the United States who have honorably served our nation in the armed forces, and whereas on Veterans Day 2019, we offer our support to those veterans who suffer illnesses and disabilities resulting from this service, and whereas there are approximately 3,000 veterans living in the town of Chelmsford, now therefore we, the Chelmsford Board of Selectmen, do hereby recognize Monday, November 11th, 2019 as Veterans Day, and on this day urge the residents of Chelmsford to remember the personal contributions of all veterans in their community and nation, and to demonstrate their respect and gratitude in appropriate ways. Signed this 4th day of November 2019 by the Board of Selectmen and sealed by the town clerk.
Thank you. Monday is Veterans Day, Monday, November 11th. At 11 a.m., we're going to have our Chelmsford Veterans Day observance at Chelmsford Veterans Memorial Park on North Road. Everybody's welcome. It's going to be a nice day, a little cold, but very sunny. And it's to honor all veterans. And again, everybody's welcome, and we'll see you there. There's no school Monday, so Monday the 11th.
See you there.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Regina.
Thank you, Captain.
Did you want to mention the new stones?
And as part of this Veterans Day observance, we are dedicated, the Chelmsford Veterans Memorial Park Committee is dedicating 2 new stones with 130, I believe, 3 names on it. So we should have a good turnout. So please feel free to come and join us. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we read the public notice?
You want me to read it? You're going to read it?
I'll read it. Next, we have a public notice from the town of Chelmsford. The Board of Selectmen will be holding their public hearing to consider whether or not the town should adopt a tax classification for the assessment of property in regard to the collection of real estate taxes. This hearing is scheduled for Monday, November 18th, 2019 at 7 p.m. in this room, room 204 at the town offices, 50 Billerica Road, Chelmsford, Mass. If you have any interest, please show up, attend, and state your piece. That brings us to open session. Is there anybody that would like to speak to the board tonight?
David Rand, 167 Dunstable Road, and I've been following you guys on the web and about the big trucks going up and down my road, and I've seen a lot of machinery going up and down my road lately. You know, like it's going to be even more next year, you know, or even later this year. And I had asked a question at the first open session we had on the road problems we had, and I didn't hear any follow-up on that. I was wondering if anybody is looking into the fact that on Ledge Road they have an underpass there already. It seems like if somebody could get permission from the state for them, they would put their own access ramps right up in, go onto Route 3 rather than through our neighborhoods and, disrupt our lives. This winter, my grandson's going to have to walk from, what do they call it, Dunshire up Dunstable Road. And with snowbanks, and those big trucks, I guess we're going to have to go down a medium or something. But I was just wondering if there was any follow-up on maybe keeping them out of the neighborhood by having an access to Route 3. That was proposed years ago, but there was nowhere near the volume. I don't know what the exact figures are, and then there were trucks going through there. But there's been estimates of we had 50 a day, and when they first started, before the police started clamping down on them, the rocks were falling off the trucks, and they're really, making a mess of our neighborhood and making it very dangerous. So, could anybody give me any feedback on that?
Well, I will say to that is we're getting an update tonight on the traffic situation as a follow-up to that traffic meeting. So if you want to stick around for that, McCall's going to go through a review of what came out of that meeting and then address points throughout it.
Okay.
Probably,
Like I said, I've been following you guys on the web,
yeah.
so, yeah, I was hoping, but I hadn't heard anything about trying to get an access, that's all.
well, we have discussed that. and
Okay,
We'll
good.
ask Mike for an update tonight. Thank you. Is there anybody else that would like to address the board? Seeing none, we'll move on to committee vacancies. Pat, do you mind reading those for us?
Okay, as of today, we have the
Bless you.
following committee vacancies. The Arts and Technology Education Fund Committee has 1 vacancy. The CCA Advisory Committee has 1 vacancy. The Center Village Master Plan Implementation Committee has 1 vacancy. Commission on Disabilities has 1 vacancy. Community Action Program Committee has 2 vacancies. The Council on Aging has 4 vacancies for associate member positions. The Cultural Council can have up to 21 members, and there are several openings on that committee. The Energy Conservation Committee has 1 vacancy. The Historical Commission has 1 vacancy. Holiday Decorating Committee has 3 vacancies. Middlesex Canal Commission has 2 vacancies. There's an alternate position available at the Neshoba Valley Technical High School Committee. The Parade Committee welcomes all applicants. Permanent Building Committee has 1 vacancy. Personnel Board has 1 vacancy. Public Celebrations Committee has 5 vacancies. The Skate Park Committee has 2 vacancies, and the Tree Committee has 1 vacancy. If you're interested in applying for a position on any of these committees, you can fill out an application online or at the town manager's office.
Thank you. All right. Let's see, licenses. So tonight we have a special license to sell wine at an agricultural event, the House Beer Brewing LLC at Maxwell's Winter Farmers Market.
House Bear.
House Bear. Got it. Not
Hi.
beer.
I'm Beth Borges. I'm with House Bear Brewing. I've been making mead since college, and we're going to be at the Chelmsford Farmers Market this winter. This is our second time at Chelmsford in general, but the first time was at the summer market.
How'd it work out?
Pretty good. Nice, friendly town. We liked it.
Good.
Yeah. Do you have any questions for me?
I don't. I remember you back then.
Okay. And I'm not less awkward now. I have a check for you guys. Should I give that to?
So I have a question on the application
Yep.
submitted to the Department of Agricultural Resources. There's a couple of questions that looks like you didn't check a box.
Oh.
It says you intend to sell, sample, or both, and you didn't check either box.
Oh, that must have got unchecked. Yes, both.
And then it asks the type of event, whether it's a fair or a farmer's market or other, and
It's-
none of those are checked. I mean, we know it's a farmer's market, but
That's strange. I'm sorry. Just that's the case. It's a farmer's market, so
I don't know if you submit that before or after?
we submit that to the MDR first, and they
Okay.
go through the application and they approve it. So
I'm
the MDR
surprised.
approved it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess they don't look very carefully at their
They
application.
probably are familiar with us because we've submitted a lot of farmers market applications to them. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
So you guys are gonna mail that permit out to us or
Hold on one
something?
second.
Oh.
After they voted.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'll make a motion that we approve
Oh, sorry.
an application to House Beer Brewing to sell wine at an agricultural event at the Winters Farmers Market at Maxwell's from November, what will this week?
16th?
November 16th through February 29th, 2020.
Second.
A motion a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Now
Have
you
a
can
great
ask,
day, guys.
now you can ask your question.
Yeah.
Did you want us to, you,
We'll get
you-
it, we'll get it the
you'll,
license. yeah.
they'll get you the license.
Thank you.
All right, the next one is a roadside vendor license for Benton Burgess.
I don't believe oh, he is here, okay. Wasn't sure they were
Easy
coming.
there.
Okay, so these are the annual renewals for the,
Yeah. Hey, Benton Burgess, 52nd Lanes. Good to see everyone again. Well, most of you. It's our annual, like Paul was saying, it's our annual request for a license to sell Christmas trees. It's for the Travis Roy Foundation. Foundation helps folks who have suffered a spinal cord injury. The main purpose of the foundation is that when people get injured, they'll come by and help their make adoptions to their house and stuff like that. Would you guys like to hear any of the new research that they're doing? I'd love to share it, but I don't have to. I know you guys have time constraints.
Didn't someone just have exploratory, like I read a headline, somebody just had an experimental surgery and regained some use. of their
Yes.
limb.
Let's let him tell it.
It was super exciting, so yeah.
Yeah, so there's some really neat stuff going on right now. One of the things that's happening is they've discovered that when you get injured, your spinal cord gets compressed. And a surgery can happen where they release the tension or the pressure on your spinal cord and allows signals to go through. And that's a really neat thing. The thing that they discovered recently, one of the things Travis wants, and this is common amongst most folks who are injured, they just want like one vertebrae back. Like Travis can't move his arms. If he can get one vertebrae back, he'll be able to move an arm. And there's some research going on at Harvard and also out in New York. They've discovered that connections are still there. Travis doesn't know it. Well, folks who are injured don't know it. But the connections are still there, and they're just sending electric pulses. They're putting a little, like a probe at the top, and they're sending electricity down the spinal cord, and it's energizing the muscles and restoring function that they thought was gone. And so the foundation is pushing to help fund that research. And the folks here at Chelmsford have helped that quite a bit. We've been doing this Christmas tree lot for almost a decade. Back when George was a young man. Just kidding, George.
That was more than a decade.
Nobody here can remember that.
Yeah, that's true. But so the thing we love about Chelmsford, though, each year the same folks come by year after year. The dedication's very nice. The Little League folks have offered us to use their parking lot to sell the trees. Chelmsford Youth Hockey has asked if they could help out. And we're more than happy to put them to work this year and help offload trees. But so we really appreciate all that Chelmsford's done for us and help to raise the funds for the foundation. Good things are happening. And we do appreciate the Board of Selectmen when you guys approve our licenses every year. I appreciate that. Do you have any questions for me?
No.
Okay, I'll make a motion that we approve the roadside vendor application for Benton Burgess to sell Christmas trees and wreaths at the 110 baseball fields from November 26th through December 20th, as presented.
Second.
A motion a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.
See you next year.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
I'm going to recuse myself from the next one.
Okay. All right, Pat, you want to read this one for us?
Hmm?
Can you read this one for us?
Do we not have anybody here from
no,
congregation?
no.
Oh, okay. Okay, the next one is another roadside vendor application for Central Congregational Church. So I will make a motion that we approve the roadside vendor application for the Central Congregational Church for the sale of Christmas trees and wreaths at the church at 1 Worthing Street from November 30th through December 23rd as presented.
A second.
Motion is second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, 4-0. All right, next up, the town clerk. Tricia, you're going to give us some information on early voting?
Good evening. I'm here tonight to ask your consideration for two things. Does look like we will have early voting for the primary, so it'll take place 5 days before the election during regular business hours. The last two times we've done early voting, we've had to collect all of the early voted ballots here and then transport them on election day to the polls, and then have separate election teams checking them in, checking them out, and then trying to run them through the tabulators in between the voters, running them through their ballots through the tabulators. And it's been a very lengthy process, and also I've never been real happy with the ballots kind of hanging around here and then leaving and going somewhere else. So what I'm asking for your consideration is to designate the town offices as a central tabulation facility for early voting, which means that we would still conduct the early voting here. The ballots would still be at the end of every night, filed by street and by address, but they'd be kept safe in the vault. And then on election day, when the polls open, we would have a warden and a clerk here, and we would have two tabulators set up with another set of memory cards, and we would do one precinct at a time and tabulate all of those ballots here at this location. That way, it keeps the security of the ballots a little bit. They never leave this building. So, but I need your vote to be able to designate the town offices at 50 Billerica Road as a central tabulation facility. That's my first request. Do you want me to keep going, or do you want to vote on that one first?
I think it's a little ironic to keep them secure. We just outlined exactly what we're going to do with them by time and date and location.
Well, except they're in a vault.
I know.
They're in a secure vault, so that makes a big difference. Yep. And everybody knows where the ballots are. The blank ballots are here at the town offices, everybody, in case you don't know. But did you want me to continue with my second request before you vote, or did you want to talk about that one first?
Okay.
Okay, I'll make a motion that the town offices at 50 Billerica Road, Chelmsford, Mass. Be designated as a central tabulation facility for early voting beginning with the March 3rd, 2020 presidential primary election and all elections and primaries federal, state, and local from that date forward.
A second.
A motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye. Very good, thank you. My next request is Steve Maffetone, the emergency management agent, has been working with me on the election contingency plan. Basically, the plan that we had from the state was very thin and not very detailed. And just given the environment that we're in these days, I just felt like we really needed to focus a little bit more on the what ifs if something ever happened on election day, where if we lost one of our polling locations, whether it be temporary or permanent, how do we keep the integrity of the election and keep the election day moving forward? So what we came up with was this. This is a draft document still. We're still waiting for tables and layouts of how we would do it. But what we need are two alternate polling locations for each one of our existing polling location. So, for example, if the McCarthy School suddenly went down for whatever reason, and it was determined that it was that the election had to be, the polling location had to be relocated, we would need to be able to have a facility that we could do that with. So, for the McCarthy School as an alternate polling location, the primary polling alternate location, I'm asking for this building. And then as a secondary location, if this building wasn't available, another disaster was about to happen, that we'd have the DPW as the secondary polling location in the event of a catastrophic emergency. For the senior center, if the senior center came down and McCarthy was still available, they could move to McCarthy as a secondary location. And then if neither McCarthy or senior center was available, then we would have DPW as an alternate location. So it just depends on the scenario. So we're going to spell all of these out in this election contingency plan, and then we're going to get down to some brass tacks and training of all of our election workers on what to do in different crisis levels, and spell out exactly what the crisis would be and then what the action plan would be, depending upon what's happening. Just a way to be prepared.
Trish, you think that this building is big enough to will that be 7 precincts here?
It'll be tough. It will definitely be tough, but we don't really have a facility in town that's big enough to have all of our precincts. And I'd rather, if McCarthy went down, I'd rather have it here than have to move all the trucks out of the DPW. DPW would only be in the event of nothing else was available. It would be tight, but we can do it. I mean, when 1 and 9 were here before, there was a lot of space in the gym. We just have to line it up, and that's why we're working on the layouts. Dave Tyler, who is a DPW worker who always lays out our polling locations for us. He's working with Scott Ludwig on the CAD, program to lay everything out and how we would fit it all in. Any other
I just
questions?
think that because of, the traffic in that firehouse next door and everything, I know it's.
It's not
but you'd have-
ideal.
You do front, you do the back and the front, is that what you do?
Well, we would probably have different polling locations in different areas of the building. So yeah, we'd probably have one on the second level and then, more down in the gym level. And luckily, we've got our wonderful emergency management team and our DPW, and they're like, don't worry about it. If we have to do it, we'll make it work. And I'm like, okay, it's still like a diagram. But, I think we can, again, this is only if we had to evacuate the building.
Right.
And until they change the rule about right now, we couldn't rent a place that has a liquor license. So that's why the Elks isn't an option at this point in time.
Thank you.
Sure. Does anybody else have any other questions about it? All right.
Okay, I'll make a motion that the town offices located at 50 Billrica Road and the Department of Public Works facility located at 9 Alpha Road, both in Chelmsford, be designated as alternate polling locations in the event of an emergency evacuation of the existing polling locations on Election Day, beginning with the March 3rd, 2020 presidential primary election, and all elections and primaries, federal, state, and local from that date forward.
Second.
Motion second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great. Thank you very much. Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Trish.
Have a good night.
Give me 5 of those. Yeah. He's got it right there.
All right, so next up, we have a presentation by Travis Miller with Criterion Associates for the fire location study.
You need to run it off your, is it on that laptop?
Yeah.
It may make more sense for me to run it.
You can just run it with the clicker, right?
It won't.
Oh,
It's
what?
not linear.
Okay. How you gonna? Yeah, just tell us if
We
you
can
want.
try to. So, good evening. My name's Travis Miller. I'm the principal for Criterion Associates. Just a little bit about me. I've been doing public safety management consulting, staffing studies, station location studies, et cetera, for 24 years now. I've done this kind of work in 39 states. For hundreds of organizations, many of which are just like this community. Suburban with some urban pieces to it, with some rural pieces to it, with major highways and other significant risk issues that you've got going forward. Could you click on the little blue introductory circle thing for me?
The next slide shows that, but.
Yeah, right there. So you asked, thank you. We're going to have a little more dialogue about this than we usually would because I tried to do something cute with this PowerPoint, make it a little less boring than usual. So we were asked to do something a little different than usual, at least in my experience, in this project. And that was because you had an arbitrator's ruling that made you add a third person to a fire station where you had previously staffed with 2 people. That in and of itself is not that crazy a thing to have happen in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. What's interesting here is that you have a number of stations that are decades old, that were in some cases not really constructed with the idea of having people being there for 24 hours a day. You made sleeping accommodations over time to handle the fact that you had overnight 24-hour coverage and full-time staffing and so on. And when you start looking at adding additional people to those stations, it became a big question of could you possibly handle having a third or fourth or 25th or whatever number of firefighters in a particular facility. can you click on the station conditions one for me? Thank you. So right now, you've got 5 fire stations. You operate headquarters with 3, maybe as many as 5 people if the shift is fully staffed and nobody's sick and nobody's on vacation and you have no vacancies. Station 2 runs with 3 at minimum, and your other 3 substations run with 2 people, all firefighters. You can just click in an empty space somewhere below the box. Yep. Oh.
You go back.
Go back one more. Go back one more. Yeah. Click on coverage of calls. Thank you. So, oops, that's fine. So the map in the right-hand bottom corner for you shows where do your calls happen. So if it's green, you can think about a typical Chelmsford neighborhood, single family, not a ton going on. These are people with jobs and health insurance who, if they get sick, they drive to the doctor. If their kid gets bit by a dog, they take the kid to the hospital by themselves. There's not a lot of calls for service coming out of those places. Where you start seeing yellow and red, Drum Hill, areas along the highway, major intersections here off of 495 by Moonstone, etc. I mean, places that we can all think of as being busy parts of town, not necessarily just because people live there, but because you've got traffic coming through there, lots of visitors, guests, and so on. You can go back one. You can go back one more. You can click on the station issues one for me. Nope.
It's not doing that, but it was, I can get there.
There you go. So the chief and I spent some time touring stations, and you've got issues here that are not unlike issues you could find anywhere up and down 495. I've worked for, 15 or 20 communities along 495. These pictures really could come from almost anywhere. They do come from here. If you click on the one that either one of the ones on the top. Nope.
Gotta keep going.
What's the title that you're looking for?
No, if you actually use your mouse and click on one of those.
Yeah,
pictures,
it's not responding.
it's not responding to it. We can go back to it. That's fine.
So what's the name of the slide you want?
Substation, significant challenges, it's way in
Yeah.
there.
I can get there.
There we go. So what happened was you had stations that were built decades ago. You added full-time firefighters. Right now in several of your stations, you've got living quarters that were built within the apparatus bay itself. And you can see from those pictures, the one on the left shows the single point of ingress and egress from a bedroom where you've got 2 firefighters sleeping. The picture on the right shows just how close to the back end of the engine company, the engine itself in that station, that sleeping quarter is.
Is this 27? Which station is this, Paul?
It's 5.
Yeah, it's all
But
jump.
you've got this in a, that's actually the better one of the two because
Yeah.
it's,
27. Yeah.
but you've got that in a couple places.
Okay.
And so even with the Plime event systems that you've built in, which are the exhaust management, the big yellow sort of crazy straw looking things that you've got hanging off the ceilings in the fire stations, these are built into the area where you're backing trucks in. You're not perfectly collecting all the exhaust, even though you've got the Plime event system in there. God forbid you had an issue with one of those engine companies itself, as we have had here in Massachusetts. If you had an issue with that truck, now you've got people sleeping in the room where the truck is on fire or having some other catastrophic issue. This is, no architect or engineer would design a station like this on purpose these days at all. Even if they would, there isn't sufficient room in those sleeping quarter areas to add a third or a fourth firefighter going forward. You can go back one.
Maybe forward one.
Do you want this or no?
Yeah. These are some of the other images about the stations. Sleeping quarters are very, very tight. As you can see from those pictures on the left, those are not built within the apparatus bays. Those are built within the stations themselves, but you've got very little capacity for adding additional people. The bathing areas within the stations are very limited. And a significant issue for you is that as the workforce within fire rescue is changing, not only nationally, but in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and as you get a mix of men and women within the workforce, we're starting to see across the country people building fire stations that have individual sleeping quarters, not the bunk room kind of thing you're seeing there on the left, individual bathing areas, so that regardless of the mix that you get on a particular shift, you can accommodate whoever it is that is there at work. Now, that is kind of what it is, but it's also a cheaper way to build a fire station, because the alternative is you build a locker room that's big enough to handle however many people might show up at work at maximum for men. You build another one for women. You do the same thing for sleeping quarters. And all of a sudden, you've built all kinds of space for people who may or may not be there at work on a particular day. So even very large fire stations, I mean, I'm talking about places that have, I don't know, in my experience, I've seen stations that might have 20 or more people living in a station on every single shift. They're building individual bedrooms because they really don't know who's going to be there at work on a given day. They're putting in fewer rooms. The stations are actually smaller as a result of this. They're less expensive, and they're putting in fewer fixtures in the bathrooms as a result of taking that approach. Go back to the, I don't know how to describe it. You can click on the GIS analysis ones. Yeah, in the 5-station one. So right now you've got 5 stations. We looked at your ability to provide coverage to the calls that you have. Now, nationally, there's been, over the past 15 or 20 years, this kind of growing conversation about how do we design fire rescue systems. And typically you'll hear discussion around the ability to put an engine company or at least a set of first responders someplace in 4 minutes or less, and then sort of the total response there in 8 minutes or less. These numbers come from a couple different places. One of them is from WPI here in Worcester for the fire side of things. The other on the EMS side comes because, I mean, scientists and statisticians like things that are easy to do just like everybody else. And so the 4 minutes and 8 minutes comes from looking at cardiac arrest. It's the easiest kind of EMS call to understand, right? At the end of a cardiac arrest call, you've got one of 2 results. You either have a live patient or you don't when you deliver that person to the hospital. If you have a trauma where somebody's in a car accident and you have to cut them out of a car, that analysis gets a lot messier, right? Did you have to amputate that limb because you had to do that to get him out of the car? Did that happen because you got there 5 minutes slower? Did it happen because of something that happened at the hospital a week later? Was that because of an infection, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? So the whole way that we look at designing these systems is based on this sort of binary understanding of cardiac arrest, which accounts for, in most systems, including yours, less than 2% of the calls for service that you deal with. I mean, that's the truth. That's what's out there as you have this ongoing conversation. Right now, from the 5-station system that you've got, you get to over 99% of the calls for service that you have, all calls for service for fire, in less than 5 minutes of drive time. In my experience, that is an extraordinary level of coverage. That is not typical at all. That is not typical if you went to other very nice communities up and down 495. Pick one. My kids go to school in Andover. They are not getting to 99% of their calls in less than 5 minutes. Period. They're just not. Let me look at the next one. So we started looking at because of the requirement that the arbitrator put on you, what would happen if you said, well, we'll take the same 12 people we've got on duty at minimum and distribute them across 4 stations instead of 5? You get 3 people at every single fire station doing that. You'd end up having to renovate 3 of the substations because you really don't have the capacity to have additional people sleeping in the stations you've got right now. You're going to have to spend some money. The nice thing is you can do that and still get to 96% of your calls for service in less than 5 minutes. Still an extraordinary level of service. And by renovating, what we're talking about is building housing that is immediately adjacent to and connected to the existing fire stations. I'm not talking about taking like a portable classroom looking kind of thing, but really building something that is appropriate for providing living quarters for the number of firefighters that you would have there. I'd build extra room. So if you get storms, like the snow they're threatening for later this week or whatever nonsense, you have the ability to house a couple extra people there, all on the first floor. Put a new kitchen in there, put new living quarters in there, put new sort of day room stuff in there. Build that, connect it to the fire station, and then use the space that you've got in your substations, gut renovate them, and do training rooms and all the other kinds of things that modern fire stations need to have, like extractors for dirty protective equipment and all that, that's separate from where you've got other laundry facilities and community rooms or whatever else it is that you want to put in them. That is much less expensive than going out and building a new fire station. Significantly less expensive. Take a look at the next one. The third one we looked at would bring you down to 3 fire stations. Now, that's closing 2 fire stations, which is a big deal. No dispute about that. You renovate 2 instead of 3 or 4. You're still getting to 94% of your calls in less than 5 minutes, which is still an extraordinary level of service. And the way that that's happening is that historically, people like you, or like George's grandfather, I'm sure, at some point, made these decisions about where to put fire stations. And they were good decisions. They were where the concentration of your workload was and where the concentration of your workload continues to be. Those are existing stations that are up there on the map. In each of these scenarios, as we look at reducing from 5 to 4 to 3, we're recommending that you add an officer in each of those stations so that you have an improved level of accountability, an improved level of authority, because in our sense, these stations are going to be operating on their own more often than they do now. Right now, if you were to get even a relatively minor call, because you've only got 2 people in most of your stations, you're sending more than 1 station out the door to those calls anyway. You get a car accident today where the person that calls, or the many people that call, as is now the case, says, I saw this accident, it looks really bad, there's a car off the road, I don't know if anybody's hurt. As soon as they say, I don't know, it makes it a much worse event from the dispatcher's perspective than it does if they say, yeah, I stopped and I was in the accident and I'm not hurt and I'm talking to the other person. They're sending a couple stations to that. You got a couple stations that are now empty going to 1 call. If you move to a model where you've got 3 or 4 people on a unit, you're much less likely to send that second fire station. But because you're not sending that second fire station, you're also much less likely to send the single officer that you've got who's based right next door here at headquarters. You're much more likely to rely on somebody who's going with that unit or from that station to be running that incident. And in our experience and from our perspective, that means you need to have more officers on duty and on the shift, taking responsibility and being held accountable for what their people are doing out there.
So Can I ask a question?
Please.
When you ran the scenario for 4 stations,
Yep.
you eliminated Station 5, and for this one, you eliminated 4 and 5.
Right.
Did you look at any other combinations, or
Yeah.
why did you choose the ones
Yeah, it's a
you
great
chose?
question. So, the way the software works, I didn't pick them. The way the software works is we essentially post the software the question of, if you were to take away a station, I tell you, what we do is we tell it, you have to keep headquarters because you just spend a ton of money on it as a practical matter. And if I give you 3 more to keep, which 3 are you going to keep software that's going to give you the biggest number of calls that you can get to in less than whatever time frame we set? And we set 5 minutes in this particular instance. When we said you can keep 3 plus headquarters, it dropped 5. So why did it drop 5? If we were to go back and look at that hotspot model, and we were to stop and think about what that part of town looks like, then, I mean, you can see in the southern part of town, that's where the least amount of call for service activity comes from. That's not to say that the people who live there don't pay taxes. That's not to say that some of the people down there don't pay more taxes than anybody else in town. I don't know, or like when I do this, I don't really stop and think about that piece of it.
So your input is, I want 4 stations, or I want 3 stations, and the algorithm advises you on which one you would drop?
So it in fact is the exact same software. So if there's a joke. If you go to Florida, people will say, well, I'll meet you at the Walgreens. It's across the intersection from the CVS. They're all using the same software.
Mm-hmm.
In their case, they're using it in the reverse of the way we're using it.
Okay.
They're taking the data they get off all those little cards that we all use to get the $1 off of our waffles, or the 50 cents off of our makeup, or the free Pepsi, or whatever it is that we get from using one of those little scan cards. The reason they want those scan cards in our hands is because they want the data so that they can do this kind of work. That data is worth billions of dollars to them. And they're using it to say, I mean, if you were going to put a Walgreens in town, if I handed you this town right now, that map, and said, well, where would you put a drugstore? Now, I know a little bit about this town. Actually, I know a lot about this town. I can guarantee you that if I go drive around in those red areas, I'm going to find drugstores. I'm going to find grocery stores. I'm going to find places to buy pizza. I'm going to find a Dunkin' Donuts, right? It's all the same software. They're all doing the same thing. They've all got somebody like me who, instead of saying, yes, I've been figuring out where to put fire stations for the past 25 years, they've got some guy that says, I wake up every morning and think about the fact that it's time to make the donuts, and I want to know where to put them. So you can buy them. I mean, that it's the same thing.
Okay.
Can I change your question?
Yeah,
Sorry,
please.
George.
Oh, right.
Can I change your question a little bit? Your software, you said here are the 5 locations. Which ones?
So
Can you change it to say, here's the town, here's the calls. Where's the optimal spot to put the 5, the 4, the 3?
Yeah, I do it like every day for people.
So how far off is it from where we have them?
Not very. We run it, even though we weren't asked to, even though I haven't shown it to them.
Might be interesting to see, though.
They're shockingly close. I take that back. That's the wrong word. They are reassuringly close. So I'm doing this right now for 4 other towns in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Literally, this exact same stuff. Because they're all in the same situation you are.
Mm-hmm.
I just did this in Andover. And Andover has 3 fire stations, geographically a little bigger than you, population-wise, not really any different. Same issues with the highways and all the other stuff.
What's their current response time?
Very similar to what yours is and would be. They're a little slower than you, and the reason is that when they built the station at the same time you guys built your substations, roughly, that's in West Andover. So they've got headquarters that looks like your headquarters. They have a station in Ballard Vale, which they're rebuilding. The thing's 150 years old or something like that, and they're building it literally here. They bought the house next door, raised it. I went there today and looked. It's a field that they're going to build a fire station on. They built West Andover. They made a bet that where all of the Armenian farms were on the west side of Andover was going to grow like crazy and look like the east side of Andover. So if you think about Main Street, like where Phillips Academy up to 495, up and down 28, they thought that it was going to look like that. It doesn't, right? It looks like South Chelmsford. I mean, there's still big farms, and there's housing developments that got built by the same Armenian family that built them here, and the same thing happened. The same French Canadian families and the Armenian families that built houses here were building them in Andover developments. So when they did what they did, when I did the work for them, one of the things that I said to them was, you need to be looking at Ballard Vale, sure, because the thing's falling, literally caving in on itself. But you also need to think about where you're going to be in 5, 10, 20 years. Because if you build it in Ballard Vale, because you've just built a brand new headquarters here, have you locked yourself into a location that you can't go back to the public and say, oops, we should have built 3 miles that way? I worked with them to look at Andover going from, there was talk at one point about them building a new exit off of 93 between Dascombe Road and 125, opening up more than a square mile of area, that they were talking about potentially building a 3-town sort of superstation in for fire. And that would have, if you think about taffy and sticking your hand in it and kind of yanking on it, that would have changed the way the taffy pulled, and where would you want to put that fire station too that's currently sitting in Ballard Vale. My primary recommendation to them was to move it 1.5 miles east and put it up on Route 28, 4 miles south of where their headquarters station is, and build a 4th fire station. They don't want to do it yet. Which means, by the way, that they'll probably, instead of having 4, that they'll end up with 5. Because they'll have a hole that they can't fill without a 5th fire station. And they don't have the road network that you have. Because you benefit from that.
So us going to 3, how does that, with them at 3 now, us going to 3, how does that equate in response times?
Well, if somebody were to go down into South Chelmsford and say, I'm going to take those couple horse farms that are down there and turn them into, I just did this work in Hopkinton. They had a bunch of turf farms on the east side of Hopkinton. They've been allowing, quote unquote, pocket development, pocket meaning hundreds of units that are built outside, well, not where the starting line for the marathon is, sort of east of there, out in the middle of what was the weeds. And they've been fortunate in that who they were building housing for at first are young people working at EMC and other places like that. Young and healthy and health insurance and, modern multifamily dwellings with sprinklers and blah, blah, blah. So there's not a lot of calls out there. Their problem is going to be when people start filling in and saying, wow, what a great place for an assisted living facility with one of these 3 levels of care. Where you've got over 55, you build 1,000 of those, 8 miles away from where your fire station is, 25 minutes, 30 minutes away from the closest hospital. They've got trouble coming, and they know it, and so they're planning for that. Hopkinton's going to go to a couple. If somebody were to go down to South Chelmsford or South Westford or any of these communities where you've got this sort of south of 495 is very different from outside, you're going to be building fire stations.
But based on your analysis today, if we were at 3,
You'll be
Andover's
fine.
at 3.
Yep.
Or our response time is going to be higher or lower than theirs?
Better. You are
Still
better.
better with 3.
Yep. And it's because you benefit from a concentration of calls. Their challenge is that, like you, they've got a big chunk of highway. Unlike you, they don't have a second fire station sitting next to one of those chunks of highway. And you do. I mean, you've got one that's fairly close to Drum Hill, which is a big source of activity for you. Despite the effort to make the Rotary better, it's still a scary place to drive.
Go ahead, George.
When we were throwing those numbers around, the configuration, whatever, you're saying we had, the response time wouldn't change, but I think the chief was, maybe will remember, the same way I remember, is that the response time in South Chelmsford would change to somewhere around 11 minutes or something like that.
Yeah, so you do get that challenge, right?
Just like double what, you know?
You do get that challenge. The problem is, not the problem, the trade-off.
But you just said it would be the same, basically.
It'll be close to the same. The challenge is you've won. It's funny because I'm pretty close to a family that lives here in town.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me a fair amount of time to convince them that the town of North Chelmsford didn't actually exist.
Really?
But there's a separate zip code.
Wait, yeah,
I know.
yeah, and we have a post office
I
and
know
our
you
water
do.
district.
Very
I
lovely
mean,
up there.
Don't cross the Rotary anymore. you know?
Careful.
I know. I'm like, really? So where's the Chelmsford High School instead of the North Chelmsford High School?
All right,
That's-
either way, let's.
Right.
You know,
So
yeah, you need to.
your challenge is that, like many communities, you're serving two communities.
We have two different type of
You have, from sort of draw the line from here, I mean, roughly, from here north, that's a pretty suburban I mean, you get to the north end, it's a pretty urban area, especially along the highways. I mean, you've got some fairly urban-looking fire rescue challenges to handle.
You have all the mills and whatever over there. You had all the
All of
large
it.
buildings in town. We're all over there.
All of it. And you go south, it's not the same kind of workload.
I agree.
And so the challenge is, and you're not alone in dealing with this. I mean, I deal with.
No, I'm not trying to be argumentative or anything like that.
No.
Something that we had done a study on.
Really good question. I'm not arguing with you at all. It's a great question. And I deal with very large departments that have 50, 60, 70 fire stations. I'm dealing with one right now down near Baltimore, Maryland. They've got 53 fire stations. 30, almost 40 of them are probably within, well, they're not probably, they are within 12 miles of the city line of the city of Baltimore. For most of them, it's like going to Brookline. Unless you're from there, you don't know if you're in Boston or Brookline or Newton, or no idea where you are. But I'll tell you what, you get 20 miles north of the city line, it makes South Chelmsford look like Manhattan. And there's 10,000 acre horse farms up there. I mean, it is it's like where I grew up in upstate New York. It is rural, the weeds. You get one fire station. They have 3 fire stations that cover an area of probably 5 or 6 times the size of this town of Chelmsford. 2 of which are volunteer. They have 1 staffed engine company and a staff medic.
Can I ask a question for planning in terms of planning purposes? So, if we, and I'm looking at possibilities here. So what you were just talking about is that you've got communities that are planning development. We sometimes go back to the 80s when we plan development here. But if we were to actually plan density and plan open space and plan places with sidewalks and commerce sensors and actually plan a modern area, so if we were to develop our horse farms, if we were to develop our open space and actually plan something, would it be easier to insert a new Station 5 because of what it looks like now? It's the size of, a garage of a large house.
Yeah.
So would it be easier in the future to plan back in a proper fire station that has
Yes.
proper distance between a bed and an exhaust pipe.
Yeah, and those are the kinds of projects I've been doing if you look at Somerville and remember you think about looking, and it's one of those places hard to tell what you're looking at, and the casino has nothing to do with them. Well, they would say it does, but if you look sort of east towards the casino off of 93 and all of that used to be not much, and then now has got multiple 20-story office buildings sitting in it, and where the Home Depot used to be in the movie theater and all that. It's just huge development all around that stuff. They've planned for a fire station in there.
That's a city in itself anyway.
It is a huge, but again, it's full of young, healthy people that are there for 40 hours a week.
So when you did this for Chelmsford, you used data from the last 3 years.
Yep.
Did you stress the system or stress the algorithm and say at what point does the response time become unacceptable? I mean, because we have ongoing development in Chelmsford,
right.
So the historical data may not
That's a great
be
question.
the most accurate indicator.
That's a great question. And it's great for a couple of reasons. So one, yes, we try, but we didn't say, well, what if somebody were to drop 8,000 housing units 5 miles south of here in the middle of one of those horse farms? We did not do that. That would certainly change.
But do you stress it to say, okay, if the number of, you had some historical data on the number of calls in the last 3 years, and
Yep.
that had an average of 100. Do you stress it to say, what if that went to 125, 150? Then what does that do to response time, so that you get a sense as to whether looking at historical data is really realistic, or whether, like, how much wiggle room do we have before that response time gets unacceptable?
Yeah, so that's a great. So what we do, so we had like 3.5 years worth of data. What we do is we take, I think in this case, we took 3 years of it and sort of took a half a year and stuck it aside for a second. We run the model using a portion of the data and then say, okay, how well would this model do at predicting what occurred on this with this set aside? And then we make adjustments. Now we're making those adjustments for a bunch of reasons, and the model doesn't care that what we are thinking about is, well, what about weather? Or what about a huge accident on 495 that meant they couldn't get someplace, huge accident on the connector that meant, it doesn't care why, right? We're just trying to test it and make sure that we've accommodated all these weird vagaries that are out there. Because you'll see people do this kind of stuff and they'll say, oh, well, the speed limit's 30 miles an hour. You must be able to drive around at 30 miles an hour all the time.
You could have a second call.
Correct. You could have a concurrent call. Your concurrent call rate is not huge here. I mean, which is a function of being the size of community that you are, right? It does happen. You'll have an interesting challenge. Right now, as I mentioned earlier, you have a lot of calls where you send a second station.
Yeah, all I'm asking, I'm just trying to understand the data. Did you stress the
We
data
did.
or not?
Yes, we did.
Okay. And
bunch,
what did it say?
In a couple different ways. So what it says is that you can function this way. Is this going to give you the capacity to handle in and of yourself 100% of what could happen in this town? Absolutely not.
Mm-hmm.
And the best thing and the worst thing about the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is the same thing, right? It's that sense of local, it's that sense of history, and that is a great thing. It's why we all love living here. But it's also something that gets in our way all the time. So I was driving back from reffing a soccer game a little over a year ago in Andover when all of a sudden the towns of Andover, North Andover, and the city of Lawrence were all on fire at the same time with 100 plus concurrent structure fires going on at once. You're never going to be able to handle that. I mean, you just wouldn't be able to.
Yeah,
and you shouldn't.
It's a nice anecdote. I'm just, if you have the data, it might be interesting to see what those breakpoints look like.
Yeah, we can provide some of that stuff to the
Okay,
chief, and he can
thank
get
you.
it to you.
And I think she's thinking too, like we've got so many units coming in now, we've got another development approved, so when you add those in, and then when you add in, fully operational, buildings along 129, if you can run ideal population numbers for those areas, I am also wondering if it would change.
It'll impact police more than it will impact fire,
Okay.
by a lot. I mean, that's just what happens. Fire calls are roughly 10% of police calls. Police calls are roughly, you can, essentially 100% of your resident population, you'll get about, I mean, you start getting weird numbers because of what you've got in terms of development in the highways and stuff like
Okay.
that, but police will be impacted way quicker than fire will be.
But I would like to see the two maps that show where the system would recommend we put 4 and 3.
Yeah, I can do that. Yep. And I can give you what I'll do too, because the maps in of themselves are like looking at two different people's x-rays. We'll give you the sort of distances between,
Mhm.
which is an interesting number for people to look at sometimes.
Time of the day, it makes a big difference too in this town.
It sure does. It does. I was thinking about that driving down today, and I've been coming into Chelmsford for over a decade for personal reasons, and I was thinking about driving down, Thanksgiving afternoon at 2:00 is a very different experience on 495 than the one I had coming down today, for sure. But even within town, it's a huge difference depending on
Big
the
time,
day.
yeah.
Yeah.
So where are we going with this from here? Or do you still have more questions?
Well, I do. I had some questions about the actual presentation that was in our kit. And I don't know if you have a copy of that out in front of you, but.
I wrote it. I can.
Okay.
I better be able.
Under section 1, where you have your conclusions, the
Yep.
third bullet down, the wording is, the Chelmsford Fire Department could function with as few as 3 fire stations. Wait a minute, am I on the right one?
The other one?
It's not, I'm sorry.
You won't,
Under
have, it.
one
You won't
under-
have it on the PowerPoint. Oh, you might have it on there though.
Under 1 under conclusions, I'm sorry, it's the top line where it says, the town of Chelmsford faces several key decisions regarding station location, potential changes in staffing of the fire department substations, and the impacts of slow growth in requests for service on the Chelmsford Fire Department. Are you forecasting slower growth in the town or slower growth for requests for help?
We were looking at the request for help. I mean, that's from our perspective. And one of the things that we're seeing is that the impact of adding 1,000 homes in 1970 versus 1,000 homes today is significantly less today on a fire rescue perspective. Because the things that we've done in terms of
Codes.
building codes and smoke detectors and all, it's worked, right? I mean, it's worked.
So you're forecasting slower growth in requests for services?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You also made a note that station, on page 3, current station situation, Station 5 with its short approach to the road. Why is that a concern?
So if you were to develop down there and try to maintain that property as a location for the station, if you crank up the level of traffic and you have that short apron is the sort of vernacular for it, the more load you put on that road, the harder it gets. I mean, to sort of peek out and make sure you're not going to drive your engine out into the middle of something that's about to hit you or that you're going to hit somebody else. So it's sort of view as well as your ability to enter and leave the traffic pattern safely.
That didn't seem like there was to me it seemed like the same distance in North Chelmsford where there.
I don't know. I mean, at least in my experience at both stations, and I've been in thousands of them, it struck me more than it did any place else.
And then on your station location analysis first bullet, you said, we tested the system, adding second stations at several locations of interest. Does that mean you told it the locations when you went out, or did you say, when we talked about that map, showing 4 stations
Yeah.
and 3 optimally, do you look around and say, where could we put it?
We
Or do you
can.
let it say that guy's house, even though it's owned and that's the land, is ideal?
We did the latter this time.
Okay.
I did the new fire station on Boston Road in Westford was the second best place to put that fire station. The model actually said that the McDonald's on 110 was the best place to put the fire station. They're not going to knock down a highly successful business to take it off the tax rolls and put a fire station there. So we look at everything, and then we start looking for what's available that's nearby.
Yep. Underneath that, you had a nice chart, which had scenario 1, 2, and 3 with the response times at 3, 5, and 7 minutes with percentage of calls covered.
Yep.
Could we see that for other towns?
I can give you some examples, sure. Yeah, I'm not going to go run maps for other people for you, but I can.
No.
Ones I've done.
Or maybe even if you just said, right now, currently, this 3 stations in Andover, the response time is this.
Yeah, I can give you the ones that I've done recently.
One at Tewksbury, Drake.
I can give you Andover. I can give you Hopkinton.
You did Westford.
Yep, and
Right.
Westford. Although 2, but yeah, I can give you that.
You have it for Shirley?
No, it's
Air.
1 station,
Okay.
surely. That functions.
Highways really make a big difference in the, any town that's, like, we have Route 3 and 495, Westford,
Yeah.
Andover's the same thing.
Andover and Westford and Hopkinton are
93
interesting.
and
Do you have any data on large, like Emily said, Marlboro, or large, but maybe larger air mass, land mass?
Done work
with
in
less
Lowell.
stations?
I've done work in large area with fewer stations. I mean, Hopkinton is the one that I've done most recently. That's like that. Where you've
Well,
got
if you
a
could
large
put
land
what you
area.
could on there.
I can do
And I
that.
don't want to kill you, beat a horse here, but if we could just get an idea what other towns' response times are.
Yeah, they're significantly less appealing than yours.
Right. Under that same section, you put these cost estimates do not include the cost of acquiring new fire apparatus for a second station. What I'm curious about is if we start,
Yeah, you'd end up using fewer pieces. So I'm just trying to caveat it to say we're making a guess here,
all right,
and those construction costs, they might actually be worse than that.
you said significantly less expensive to renovate. What's significantly? If your estimate is 5 to 7 for a new station, half?
Yeah, I mean, I think you could build. So if you're talking about building a couple thousand square feet, you're talking about $500,000 or $600,000, $700,000, something like that. You get into renovating. A lot of the kinds of space we're talking about is fairly. I mean, it's finished, but it's not fancy finished kinds of spaces. So if you're talking about a meeting room versus sleeping quarters, if you're talking about an area to run laundry versus multiple places for people to do bathing during shift and stuff like that, they're less expensive to build. You're probably talking about by the time you get done, if you were to do living quarters and you were to renovate, $1 million a station, maybe a little less than that. And those are.
And then my last
I
question.
do not run a construction firm, so please do not come looking at me to do that project.
All right, my last question was, you had said cardiacs was 2% of our calls. Could we get a report showing what percentage of what?
Yeah, I'll work with the chief to do that.
Okay.
Yeah. But nationally, I mean, the larger point that I was trying to make was that it's fascinating to me as somebody who does this every day that we as a nation, and really most developed countries with fire rescue systems that look either like ours or potentially even better than ours, they've all chosen to develop their systems based on those numbers. And it's not a huge part of, it's an important part of what they do, but it's not a huge part of what they do. And the sort of depressing, fascinating part of it is, even if you have a witness cardiac arrest and dispatch processes that call and somebody's there on scene doing CPR and they're not in the library where you've got an AED, we'll leave that out for a second, and they get out of the station in a hurry, and they get there in less than 4 minutes of drive time, the survivability rates for viewed cardiac arrest are not reassuring, even with all of that. The thing that makes the biggest difference is the AED. I mean, it is the single biggest difference maker, but it doesn't impact all cardiac issues. And they're made right here in town.
Yeah.
Some of them, many of them.
Okay. Anybody else have questions?
Yeah, before we leave the discussion, thus far we spent virtually all the time speaking about response to the public. The other aspect of this equation is the responders' public safety.
Yes.
In terms of the firefighters and who are responding to the calls. And in fact, the arbitration award that he referenced at the beginning was based upon firefighter safety.
Mm-hmm.
And in the considerations of this, I think you've got to bear in mind what that is, because we heard about it when we were at the meetings in Boston. The OSHA standards, the NFPA standards are 2 in, 2 out, which means when that apparatus shows up at the scene, there's 4 firefighters. Today we're running, as you saw with the model, there are many with 2, and now 1 with 3.
You mean 2 in the building, 2 out of the building?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And that's where he spoke about the fact that, well, you're often sending multiple apparatus from multiple stations to a call. That's the concern. So I guess what I'm getting at is if either he wants to speak to it or the chief wants to speak to it, the thing you've got to bear in mind when you're talking configuration is the ability for when the apparatus arrives on the scene, the ability to respond to the call. Because unless you've got 4 firefighters, you can't respond effectively to that call. That's what we heard loud and clear, and that's what we're still hearing loud and clear at the table.
Well, I think you're hitting the nail on the head.
So
I
I
mean,
think, and so the model of the 3 firefighter response team doesn't cut it. And not to say it doesn't exist around us, but I think
It's everywhere.
Yeah, but I think that has to bear in mind is we can't overlook the response of the safety of the firefighters responding, and therefore the ideal model, if they are close, in weighing whether you have 4 with 3 or 3 with 4, it does matter in terms of when that piece arrives at the scene, or are you sending one scene, and then what are your secondary calls? Because if you've got 3 with 4, you may be sending one group, and then you still have the other 2 to respond.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you've got 4 in the center station, you may be sending 2 on a rescue, 2 on another piece of apparatus, and then if nature of the call is that perhaps half that or one of the apparatus peels off because the nature of the call, if it's a medical call, if somebody's broken an ankle, you don't need to keep four responders from the center station at the scene. So I don't know if you want to touch it.
But before you jump into that, I mean, I also know that if you do send a truck with 2 guys and they show up at a fire, they may make the decision that one's going to go in while one stays in the truck, and it gets incredibly dangerous for the guy that's going in.
Exactly. And
or woman.
And that's the
Say it that
idea
way,
of that's the idea of the 4 on it
Right.
showing up at a scene. And so when you're looking at the differential between 99.4 versus 99.1 or 96.8 versus 96.4 or 68.7 versus 66.3, you've also got to bear in mind the safety of the responder as well as the ability when that crew responds to attack the scene.
You have a real working fire, you're gonna need somebody tying to a hydrant too. You're
Oh,
gonna
yeah.
need additional water, so you need to actually.
Well, yeah, once there's a working fire like we had on Glen Avenue, they're all going. And you're calling in mutual aid.
I mean, the 2 in, 2 out thing, from OSHA's perspective, does apply to interior attack on fires. The concept is immediate threat to life and health. And that concept expands way beyond fire, right? So if you put somebody into a hole in the ground to go work in a vault for Verizon, that guy doesn't go in that hole by themselves. I mean, we all joke about, why do you have 5 guys the 4 of them have to hold up the shovel while the other guy goes in the hole? Well, I mean, there is a reason for them to be there, right? So that if there's gas in the ground and the guy goes in and is
passed out.
succumbs to whatever. You've got
Yeah.
people there that can do something about it, can make the proper phone calls and start to try to put on the proper equipment and rescue the guy and all that other stuff. I mean, if a four-person engine company showing up at a structure fire that's in places that have four-person engine companies, they're not dumping two people in there unless somebody is standing in a window yelling, "Help me, help me, help me, I can't get my baby out of this room." We're treating it like it's a working structure fire, right? That you've got a crew that's going to go in, you've got a crew that's going to get a hand line to the front door, you've got a crew that's going to handle the hydrant. I mean, there's lots of work to do once you get a big working event. That working structure fire is the cardiac arrest of the non-EMS side of the business. You handle a lot of car accidents in this town, a lot of high-speed, extrication required, crazy on television looking car accidents in this town. They require a lot of hands. They just do. You're taking cars apart and trying to do it safely and trying to care for the patient, even though you're not the ones doing the transport, and you've got somebody else coming in to provide. You've got 2 or 4 people.
So is it fair to say right now you got a car accident like that, which needs a lot of hands? You got right now we have a truck showing up with 2, and then the second truck shows up. So if the first truck gets there within 5 minutes, the second truck gets there within 7 minutes.
Well, probably less than that.
6.
Right. I mean, right now, if you had a car accident on Route 3 or on 495, you're going to dump Central, all of it. You're going to send them all. You're going to send another I mean, you're not sending 4 people or 2.
Right.
If we have an accident on 495, we'll have, generally it'll be the rescue. If we only have 2, which we only have 2 firefighters in here tonight, so it'll be the rescue and the closest engine. So with this 4 staffing configuration we're talking about, we would have an engine, or probably the rescue, and then you would probably have to, have another engine. The problem with the 3-station model, if we were to go to that, I mean, the advantages are to have the 4 firefighters who can safely fight a fire, the 2 in, 2 out we always talk about. But we don't talk about 4 firefighters are more effective at a fire. They're 30% more effective than having 2 firefighters, which we have. They're 25% more effective than having 3 firefighters. And that's as a result of a landmark study that happened in 2010. I know what it's like to run 4 stations. We did that back in 2008 to 2011 when we closed Engine 5. I don't know what it's like to do it with 3 stations. However, if that's the direction of the committee, and I know we've talked about having a committee, I would need to staff up the center station. Right now I have 5 moving engines. I can handle a lot of multiple calls. I can handle multiple medicals, investigations, alarm activations, Mrs. Smith falls, lift assists. We have 5 engine companies, so we can handle a lot of calls. That's the beauty of the system we have right now. But the reason we're here today is obviously because of firefighter safety and the fact that we are not staffed to the NFP level of 4. In fact, we don't even approach our neighbors who have 3, Andover, which Travis has talked about, Westford, Lowell. So that is the event for me, if we're going to go with a 3-station model, and I don't want to get ahead of the study, I know we're going to have a group to take a look at this, I would need to have 2 moving pieces coming out of the center station. We would have to staff up, is what I'm saying.
So I have a question. I know we have a non-transport ambulance. So how many of those do we have? Do we have 1? So if we know that there's
For medicals?
Yeah.
So by the contract, we have 1 dedicated by the contract, 24 hours.
Yep.
By the contract, we have another one from 7 in the morning to 7 p.m., but it doesn't really matter because we've had 3 medicals, we've had 4. Yeah. They have the ability to flex multiple ambulances in town because they're right on Drum Hill.
Right.
So we've had that issue, actually, I think it was last April when we took a look at the numbers. We've had those concurrent calls, back-to-back medicals, and Trinity was able to handle them without the mutual aid, if that's what you're looking for.
No, I was looking at the non-transport ambulance. That's what I was asking about.
Just stress that those are not your people. That's a third party. That's a totally separate entity.
Right. Yeah, they know that.
I was asking about the non-transport ambulance. So, and how many times that goes out?
The non-transport?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, for the engine.
Like
I'm
the
sorry.
actual,
We go out for all the medicals.
Yeah.
So we send the closest engine. So we will send the closest engine with the police, with Trinity, and if it's a cardiac, we will send Greater Lowell paramedics or Trinity's paramedics.
Right.
That is the standard for medical.
Okay, so what I was asking for was actually the number of trucks we have that can fight a fire versus so what I'm asking for is a definition of a non-transport ambulance and whether or not those do double duty as water pumps or ladders or.
So 5 engines right now, 1 in reserve, a ladder, rescue, all capable of responding to medicals.
Can you just define engine for?
An engine, which the engine will have a pump, ground ladders, emergency equipment on it, obviously 2 Class 5 ambulances for us, which have to have certain medical equipment. We're inspected by the state. So we have 2 Class 5 ambulances. We don't transport with them, but in the event of an emergency, I have the ability to transport with those. Haven't done it yet, but you know we have OMS will come in once a year to inspect our rescue and our engine because we have to have certain medical equipment to keep that Class 5 license.
Okay.
So you said we have 2 non-transport ambulances?
Correct.
And how often?
It's a Class 5, they
Right.
call it.
How often do they go out?
They go out all the time. So one's a rescue
Yep.
right
Okay.
here, and one's the engine one. But being a Class 5, we have to have certain criteria, certain medical equipment on there, and we're get inspected by the state.
Got it.
Anything else?
So where do we go from here?
Everyone's like, my sense would be is we'd form a working committee, much like when we put a committee together to build the center station. You know, we'd have, you know, members of the fire management, the firefighters themselves, members of the public. You know, we and put a committee together to sort of advance this forward and you said get additional data, also start running some of the financials in terms of, you know, what does it mean in terms of costs. That's always the determining factor in Chelmsford in terms of, you know, what does this come out to? You heard mention about apparatus, spare apparatus, construction of buildings, and staffing of personnel as well as promotional opportunities, positions as well. So, you know, I think the last time our committee was 9. I think when we did the
Around 9, yeah.
I think it was, but you know, and I would think we'd similarly proceed in that manner.
So that was one of the things I noted in here was that the span of control was covered. And so there was a recommendation for lieutenants and captains. So can you go over our current ranking system and what
Sure.
we have?
We
Ranking system is the wrong word, I'm sorry.
have captains and we have privates, or basically your firefighters. We do not have any firefighters in the position of lieutenant, so there is no, you know, you basically have a captain on 24/7, 365, and then you have the rest are staffed by privates.
How many captains do we have?
We have one on duty 24/7, then we've got a deputy chief and a chief, and then obviously if there's an issue filling a shift with a captain, we would, you know, that we've had instances, unfortunately, where the deputy chief or the chief have filled in.
Isn't there also another captain that does,
Well, we have fire inspection captains as well.
Are you asking how many people we
How many
have
people-
who are
yeah,
How many
captains?
total captains do we have on our?
9? 7.
How many lieutenants would we need under this system?
Well, remember, you're staffing 24, right now, we have a challenge staffing with 9, 24/7, 365. I'm sorry, with 7, 24/7, 365. So
And
if you're
that's
gonna,
a challenge?
yes.
So we would need an increase in captains and
No,
to create
not,
the-
No, no,
not saying
'cause
that.
it's-
I'm just saying is we often have difficulty filling shifts with 7.
And this is calling for lieutenants as well.
Yes.
And so would we need 7 lieutenants?
well,
Yeah, you'd have
according
to-
to,
Per shift.
You have to
It
have 4 per
depends how many
shift.
stations
Depends how
you
many
have.
stations you
How many
have.
For
yeah.
one,
But if you're running 24/7, 365, you know, you need 4 to staff, you know, just 24, you know, one position. So you start doing the math over times per station.
could be 12 if you do.
Yeah, what we're suggesting is 1 per station per shift. You start getting into larger systems, and you'll find them building in essentially floating officers that are used to, you know, we've got 10 stations, we need 10 captains, we have 13 or 14 captains per shift. Because we know that a couple of them are going to be off on sick or vacation or family medical or whatever. So we've got some floaters that are built in, but you're not big enough to do that. So in a smaller community, a smaller system, you typically assign per shift, one per shift per station. And then either your first idea would be to go, if you had a lieutenant that was off on sick or vacation, you go to your captains and lieutenants and say, does somebody want to take this shift on overtime? Typically. And this is a union issue, but typically that's what you do. If you can't get a yes within a certain period of time from that cadre, many times you'll have firefighters that are viewed as qualified either because they've done certain educational things or because they've passed the civil service exam but haven't been picked off the list or whatever mechanism you use internally. You'll make an officer in charge out of somebody and typically pay them a differential between what they would have made and what the lieutenant would have made for working that shift.
So Paul, for this committee, is it something that you and the chief would recommend to be on it? Do we put it out there for the public members to
Last
apply
time
for?
last time we did it, we put it out there. We posted it and asked people to apply. And then we appointed a committee and I believe, those appointments were confirmed by the Board of Selectmen at the time. They're going back now, over a decade ago.
If this gets put into a committee, can we collect all of the past studies, put them in a binder so that we are not reinventing the wheel and not going back? There might be pieces of information that need updating, but we have done so many studies and there has been so much work done on all of these issues that it would be helpful to just have that in a binder presented to the members of the committee so that there is an easier learning curve, or at least
we
a path
would,
to getting
like
up to
we did
speed.
a station configuration study back then. We would obviously provide that to the committee, that's formed today. Yeah, it's been 12 years.
Any other comments? So what do you need from us to do that?
My sense is I'll come back. I'll post the committee interest and then come back to you.
What's
We're in
what's the
November.
makeup of the committee? Like 2 firefighters, 6 residents? What?
No, it's not going to be that large.
I know, but
No, but
just-
and what happened the last time
What's
is
the demographic of it?
right. Well, the last time we had more firefighters than others on the committee because we didn't get response from the public. That's what happened
Okay.
the previous time. So we ended up appointing members who had firefighter backgrounds to the public positions. So again, if you're talking a 7-person committee, you're going to have
The deputy chief on there?
we had the deputy chief. We had the president of the fire union on there. We had other firefighters, and so that's we would put a committee out there. We also want members of the public, generally who to make it somewhat representative of the community. I'll come back
From
to
the
you.
emergency management committee, were they on there as well? I'm not sure.
I don't believe emergency management was on there.
So you're talking maybe like 2 members at large or something?
Yeah, generally I think it was 2 at large last time.
I mean, is that enough for the different sections of town?
I don't know.
Well, again, their meetings were posted. They take public input. They take public discussion.
And the phone numbers are out there, so, I mean, it's one of those things, where we saw at town meeting where folks are standing there asking the top levels to do all the work. But, I mean, when you have representatives, the point of representatives is to figure out information and bring it up into the fore.
Ken, your concern is that you might want stakeholders from the different areas, geographic areas?
I'm just asking, plain devil's advocate, but I'm fine if you want to go that route.
Well, it would come back to this board for any action, and I think we all represent the entire town. We don't-
The problem is you start forming
Yeah,
11-person
too many
committees.
people,
There's too many, it
yeah.
doesn't work.
You can't get it
It just
done.
becomes
Can't get anything
unwieldy.
done.
So, Is there a foregone conclusion here that I'm missing? Does anyone have like an end goal? Is there a conclusion that has already been drawn here?
I don't have a conclusion because we haven't put any numbers to the paper. I mean, we haven't, we've seen some ballpark numbers of station construction costs. We've seen some models. But I think the whole discussion point is it covers a number of areas. You've got, as we said earlier, you've got the facility costs, you've got the apparatus cost, and you've got the personnel costs. And we don't have that flushed out. And
Would
so
there
I have no
also
conclusion.
be money for continuing studies? Because this is sort of the bare minimum of what Chairman Diggs asked me to lay out.
Well, we're not doing a station or a department analysis. I mean, for example, I don't think this committee is going to look at ambulance. That's not the sense I have from this board. And so, so we're not, that becomes a major expense. I think we can get credible numbers, for example, on apparatus costs, station, facility cost, and personnel costs.
Yeah, those are quick phone calls. Those are easy.
Exactly, yeah.
But I think to answer your question, Emily, where this came from and what spurred this on was at one of our previous meetings, it came out that Paul had inferred that, the staffing may need to go up for safety reasons, for the safety of the firefighters. So you have two choices. You keep 5 stations and you want to get 4 guys on a truck, then the size of your department grows. If you want to, try to keep the department numbers close or slightly raised from where they are today, how do you do that? And so that brought on the conversation of, well, you do it with less stations. Well, if you're going to do that, how do you do it? And then the question became, you got the expense of fixing stations. Obviously, Station 5 is, I cringe at the fact that you got someone sleeping in the bay with the fire truck. And you looked in that picture, the weights for their gym were literally on the floor behind the fire truck. I would be prouder if we had better stations for those firefighters that they could live in.
So I think if we're going to do a committee, we need to look at both possibilities. Like, it needs to be one of these situations where you look at all the possible outcomes that could happen, and you look at them and weigh them individually. So
Well, I think you're going to get that if you put firefighters on the committee.
But what we're looking at is 5 stations versus 4 stations versus 3 stations.
Right.
That's the scope of the committee.
Yeah.
We're not going beyond those boundaries.
And to look at
With some sensitivity
quality of
analyses
living,
and-
Right.
staffing levels,
Mhm.
and safety for the firefighters.
Yeah.
Have you been in any of the outlying stations?
Mhm.
Have you?
And the physical limitations. I mean, you cannot put 4 firefighters in the South Fire Station. That ain't happening.
That's the other thing I'm trying to figure out, is that, like, trying to figure out how, when you have a parcel of land like this, including, parking, where are you going to put an extra row of bedrooms with ensuite bathrooes? Like,
Right,
I
it
don't
may not work.
understand how we can do that
Right, right.
for a
Ensuite.
first floor. Like, I
I've been to all of them except for one, George, 5.
Have you?
But I mean, that's what we do. I mean, so you've got limits. You've got 5 stations with 4. There's 20. I don't think the study would go beyond 20 firefighters. Which is 5 with 4, and then you've got 3 with 3, which is not going there either. That's 9 people. I mean, that's not happening. So I mean, so it is bounded by practicality.
So are we
with the numbers?
Are we accepting the possibility that we might need to reconfigure rank, and we might need to take on more staff? Like, where are the?
That's what I'm saying. That's what the numbers will show.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, and again, it just becomes linear. If you're going to have 20 firefighters versus 19 versus 15 versus 12, then you have those numbers. And then the same thing, the apparatus cost. You take the average cost of a fire apparatus, and then you take the cost of so many.
And we have a list. We have them
Yeah.
on a spreadsheet. There are some
Right.
that need to be replaced, I think,
Right.
next
Right.
year.
Yeah. So I
So-
mean, that's
We
what we
got
do.
needs for trucks.
Yeah.
And updates to the current.
Right.
I mean, when you add all that up, I mean, it gets pricey
Significant, yeah.
with what's facing us the next
And
5
again,
years.
some of us still have the battle scars from getting a center station built when it was falling in the ground. So we also understand the realities of the situation in the town.
Okay.
Anyway, we'll do that.
All right. Second here.
Lisa.
All right, so we're up. Lisa, come on down.
Good evening, Lisa Maroney. I'm here for my quarterly update. It's been a quick few months that have gone by, so just going to give you what I've been up to since August when I was here last. It's a little summary. So my time and effort here, that looks really tiny. I don't know if you could make that look a little bigger. Okay.
You mean your accomplishments are bigger?
Yeah, that would be great. So I've been attending a lot of events representing Chelmsford, promoting the crossroads at 129 everywhere I go. And here are a few photos of the last few, thank you so much. The last few activities. I've been on panel review with the New England Real Estate Journal representing our efforts here, going very well. That was in front of an audience of developers and real estate brokers, learning about the opportunities. I've had some follow-ups, which you'll see on the next slides coming forward. The events that you're aware of have been very successful. Out in the Brook, brought out 1,500 visitors to Chelmsford, and we're hoping to do that event every year. It was sponsored by Enterprise Bank, and Center Village was a very well-attended event down there, and we're working on the Holiday Stroll next. That's coming up on December 7th. We've had a couple of ribbon cuttings. You should all be receiving my invitations. And site visits in the last couple months that I've been on for various reasons. Some of them are touring interested possible tenants. Some of them are at request by the businesses to come and talk with them about technical assistance opportunities, networking events that I've been to most recently, and some of those efforts and accomplishments, I guess. Next. Meet and greets are opportunities where I receive contact from interested parties that want to come and talk and learn more about business development in different areas. So I kind of noted that, a lot of 129 interest, which has been happening all along. But I'm trying to create a category here so you can see some of that. It is a partial list because, as you might know, in business development, some of it is facilitating opportunities that aren't necessarily wanting to be, aware of what's happening, but I am meeting with entities interested in the Business Amenity Incentive Grant. So those are establishments in surrounding towns that are curious and interested to think about locations on 129 and taking opportunity of the incentive grant. I did receive a call today from an establishment in Norwood that was looking to expand north of Boston. So the message is getting out. We are advertising in the New England Real Estate Journal. This is a copy of the ad there that you see, along with some other additional efforts that I've been doing in other types of programs townwide to support businesses and technical assistance and programming, general programming to support the business community. A list of the available space. I showed this at my last update. This listing's a little bit more viewer friendly. You can see the details of the square footage that's out there. That's the polygon that's just focused on the 129 Crossroads area. I've been in contact with each and every listing that's here, and it's been continual business exchange. They are regularly showing their properties. So it's not by lack of interest. The town has done everything possible, as we're told by the property owners. They are very pleased, and I think I've spoken about this a few times before, very pleased with what the town has done to support their needs in terms of zoning, permitting, technical assistance. We're very ready and available to speak with any potential prospects of clients. But this continues to be the available major areas of square footage for 129.
Lisa, are there any major differences between this and what you had?
Not since August. Mhm.
Yeah.
This is a look forward into some efforts coming up and things that I'll be working on and putting effort in, amongst other things. It's not a complete listing, but continuing to push the business amenity incentive grant, events coming up. We are working on a small business seminar about 5-6 months away, just basically picking a date on the calendar to start talking about an itinerary of what that might look like. I am trying to make a concerted effort to provide support through a town-wide business community. Certainly a concentrated effort on 129, but I would like to also provide support through all types and sizes of businesses, looking to expand the ribbon cutting program. It's been pretty popular, and some of the other programs that I mentioned that I'm getting more involved with. Same as prior, my 3 major goals as expected of me throughout this fiscal year. So I just keep them on my presentation to you to be aware. So working on continuing to expand the marketing of 129, talking with some of the property owners initially about some signage out there, of getting some comments about tenants that are coming to look at space. They're not really aware that they're in the business park. So looking to kind of create some physical identities out there to the business community in the business park, and we'll be making more efforts towards getting some of that information gathered and put together and continuing to push towards my goals and objectives. But that's basically the summary of my presentation in the last couple of months. So I'm not sure if anybody has any questions or comments or concerns or suggestions about anything.
Is there anywhere that you need support or help from us that you're not getting?
No, I can't say that is. I do feel like it's important that we continue to be as responsive as possible, which we have been, and we're getting great feedback by the businesses that are looking as well. They're very impressed with our zoning and our support system in place. That's not the problem. So a lot of this issue is where I'm not involved between the tenant and property owner. So, but as far as, the town being involved as best they can, it's been great feedback for everything. And so there isn't much more on this perspective. I am putting out to the community and to the owners as being a business resource to them, not necessarily viewed as a municipal member, but as a business resource to help solve problems and overcome barriers and obstacles to fill up space. So it just takes time.
You're doing great.
Yeah, thanks.
Question: We had gotten a grant to redo our zoning, our
Facades?
No, this was back a little ways.
Site
Down in the
readiness.
building department, for commercial businesses to go through the zoning book and to digitalize that and do all
Okay.
that. Do you remember we worked on it, I think it was like a year ago?
Is that the permitting guide?
Yeah.
I talked about the permitting guide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that been a big help now that that's?
So if you see a lot of the ribbon cuttings, I don't know if you realize how many invites I've been putting out. There's an awful lot coming forward, and I think that guide, having a collective source of info, I think it's available online. I haven't seen it printed in paper myself, but it has been a change between the building inspector has been very available, interested to meet with prospected businesses as they come in and express interest in a certain location, available on the spot or the next day to just help encourage or make known what areas need to have more focus and attention on. And that just prevents, issues forward. So it just creates a happier business community by having that involvement. And the permitting guide certainly part of that, because small businesses aren't necessarily aware of the municipal process. They don't necessarily know about a signage ordinance where there's regulations for size and things like that. They're just in their entrepreneurial mode of trying to get a new small business open or learn that each community operates a little bit differently. So there's sometimes a learning curve with that. So I try to make those connections and follow the permitting, when they pull permits.
Right.
I try to introduce myself at that point to make sure that we can provide as much
'Cause I know
technical support.
We did the ribbon cutting at the storage center out there.
Yeah.
And one of the comments he made to me was it went really smooth from a permitting standpoint. He knew what he had to do inside the building. He was very well. Everything was communicated to him. It was nice and smooth, which is good to hear.
Yeah, and that's not easily done.
Right.
It's, it takes a real effort, a coordination, a concentrated effort of people that genuinely want to, create a business-friendly environment and not just put that label on there. We're actually doing it, and you can probably talk with any of the new businesses that are coming in, and not just the big ones, but probably any of them. Most all of them are very impressed.
Can you give us an update on the $100,000 grant that we now have going on?
Sure. So I'm still receiving interest, doing some meet and greets. I think we've met with 5 so far, received another call today. So it takes a while for the info to kind of seep out. We are getting restaurants as well as breweries in the same regard. I have not had any progressive conversations other than some initial discussions about the parameters, and we did put it out to be very, very general so that they could come forward and we could have the most meaningful conversation rather than create a lot of restrictions in the announcement. So in the introduction of the grant, we're basically asking that they secure a lease on 129 with the property owner and then come forward so that we could see the potential of how best to award the grant, either to a single user or maybe if we get 2 applications or 3 strong applicants, we would try to figure out another opportunity of how to package, maybe split the grant or find another way of how to make more projects happen out there. It's kind of unlikely, but we want to make sure that we give ourselves the best chance possible to award the grant money.
Yeah, it's interesting you say other ways to help, because in my mind, I'm thinking, for anybody who paid attention to the financial news back in August, they talk about the yield curve inverted, and that means recession's coming and the sky's falling. But usually the recession doesn't come for about 21 months on average from the point the yield curve inverts. So from August, 21 months brings us back to May 2021, roughly. And my thought is, even if somebody signs something now, they're not going to probably break ground or do much to the spring. And that means we got to get them open in 6 months, 7 months to get them going. To me, 129 really has to, it's almost like we talked about the AED machine before, needs to be zapped, with a shocking event that will wake it up.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you explored any other ways other than the $100,000 grants. If companies come forward and ask for TIFs or anything else, I'm just wondering how immense of a shock can we throw onto 129 to get a pulse?
So if you recall, the Site Readiness Grant put out 8 recommendations, and the top first recommendation was to get a signature project out there. And from what we know and hear from the occupants and the ones that have left 129 in the last year, it's all about the business amenities. It's all about needing a restaurant and conveniences and, a place where people can meet and gather or get a quick lunch and not make it a big destination. So we've been trying to talk with them and ask those property owners, what is it that you need from us? What more can we be doing? And, initially they were saying, there is, you're doing all that you can, the zoning, the permitting, the support, the technical assistance, all of that. I don't know how in their business discussions with their prospective tenants, we haven't yet really been informed of who's looking. We're dealing with office buildings, so having that large volume of office buildings, who's really, the highest demand for this area is high bay space, which there isn't any high bay manufacturing space. So we get into these discussions of some prospective tenants want to create high bay within the office buildings. And that's significant change. We're talking about coring out a shell of a building, that's a significant change. So
Has there been much turnover in property ownership out there?
maybe 2 buildings
Okay.
since I've arrived, and that's another part of the issue. So it's a catch-22. If you want to start talking about the consideration of discussing a tax incentive, there's an education to that process that it's not necessarily giving a tax break. It's more about encouraging property investment that changes the assessed values of property.
I
to
know, I
rise-
brought up the evil word, so
Yeah,
for anybody at
you
home.
did.
Yeah, we're not.
You
we're
did.
not- when someone signs a TIF, they don't get a full tax break. It's only,
No.
they get a tax break on the additional value that they bring to the building.
You're still paying baseline taxes on empty buildings or full buildings.
I'm just wondering, to secure a signature development, at what, we say that, but I want to know at what cost we're willing to commit to that.
Well, and so that goes back to, if in my discussions, if we talk about a TIF, it's got to be a significant investment. It can't necessarily be fitting up a kitchen for a restaurant. It has to be a significant project with job creation, a real, like you're saying, a real shock value to 129 to really create some longevity and a future redirection of 129. So the only missing piece that I have aware in my toolbox is to think about bringing that into the discussion, but I'm not necessarily involved in who's at the table with the
Correct.
property owner and the broker.
When I think of 129, part of me goes right to that raw piece of land that's been cleared, and as an ideal location. How does a TIF affect that? Because there's nothing there now. Do they get a tax break on everything they do?
There's 2 different segments. There's a special tax assessment, that's an STA, and there's a TIF, which is a tax increment financing. And there's major differences between the two. One will accommodate the value of the land, a raw piece of land with the new construction. You can also use that with a TIF, but there's a lot of terms and conditions to consider. They're not really interchangeable, and STA has mandated tax assumptions by the state for the first 5 years of an STA, where a TIF is more negotiated between the investor, whether that's the owner or the tenant, the investor in the town. It gets a little more involved in the separate segments. And then, further in on that, it's also a TIF only is just real estate.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do a full TIF, that's job creation, full-time jobs with benefits. So it gets really involved. So when you go back to your original conversation about creating a shock value on 129, if you're looking at an office building and you're trying to create high base stakes, that's very significant, especially in demand. But if you've got an office building and you're fitting up cosmetic things that aren't really changing value, but they're spending money, it's not necessarily a high value for a TIF agreement.
Mm.
It really depends on the project.
Got it. But, Paul, how does that, so you don't negotiate TIFs, right?
I have in the
Board of
past, but-
Selectmen does those, or how does that work?
We bring them to the board.
But you
that's-
work 'em out.
Right, but the problem isn't that we're not reaching agreement with TIFs. The problems aren't that TIF are tax related. The problem are really the property owners not looking to invest in their facilities. And that's where it seems to end. I mean,
Yeah.
Lisa's being a little more diplomatic than I am, but that's really where the problem lies, is the, and we and she shares some of those frustrations where you had one who wouldn't provide, so much, few months of initial,
I spent a lot of time with that company. It was a small life science company, and I spent a lot of time just to get that one. We're just looking to get the first one. I spent a lot of time, but they did not want to pay any of the fit up themselves. They wanted it to be completely covered by the town or by the property owner.
I asked about new owners because where I have a business in town, and the building that I'm in, it did change hands. And I'm noticing the new owners in there are getting prices to redo the bathrooms, repaint all the hallways, repave the parking lot, replace windows.
There doesn't seem to be a pressure point. We haven't reached the pressure point yet. We've had a lot of long-term vacancies that I've been told of prior to my arrival, so we haven't really received a pressure point to fill them yet. But we are competing with the region of other empty spaces. So how do we make our package more appealing? And like the town manager said, it's not necessarily a TIF is the changing point. It could be, but
From what
maybe,
I just heard, nobody's brought up TIF.
Right.
Right.
yeah.
It's not that it's not an option, it's just
Right.
not an interest.
Right.
Okay.
Hasn't been brought up, yeah. And again, depending on the type of business, who's looking, why they're looking, or any of that. And remember, TIF is a binding tax agreement with the town and the state. Some of the property owners don't necessarily want to be connected in that way for 5 to 20 years is the term of a TIF.
Mm-hmm. Paul, are there any other ways we can entice or, like I said, shock 129? Or is there, from a town manager standpoint, anything you think you could?
I mean, we're doing everything you can. It comes down to amenities. It's no one seems to want to be the first one in, and
Right.
that's what seems to be the barrier. And I think the site that you located, it appears that that's even more challenging because of the distance from Route 3, and that if you're going to get retail first one in, it's going to be closer to the Route 3
It's
interchange.
the north gateway to
Yeah.
the crossroads, yeah.
And
Each of those conversations, when they have meet and greets, people are generally very surprised that I think some of this is an awareness factor. I mean, I'm in it every day, all day, but I think when I'm at other events that aren't in the immediate, 10-mile, 20-mile, if they can come and have a conversation face-to-face and not look through a zoning ordinance, they can realize how flexible and adaptable the buildings can become.
Mm-hmm.
But that's more of a marketing, and that takes money.
but when we saw Omni Way sell and there was the investment made, it filled up.
It
And
filled
that
up
was-
right
that-
away.
Right, that filled up right away, and that's,
Yeah.
and
Well, that's the other amazing thing is Omniway's 100%
Our
occupied.
sweet spot is 30 to 50,000 square
Right.
feet. All those buildings, I have 4 buildings that are over 100,000 square feet each.
And that's half your inventory.
And most of those buildings don't have cafeterias.
So the DPW needs to open up a coffee shop right there. That's town-run. Town-run coffee shop, Paul.
right,
First one out there.
right.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
All right, John Souza, you're up.
They still are to charge.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'd like to provide you tonight with a brief update on our two of the town's long-term liabilities. If we go to the next slide, and the long-term liabilities that we have are retirement liability, which is for the Middlesex County Retirement System, and that covers all general government employees and all school department employees except for those that are covered under the Mass Teachers Retirement System. And then and you can see that the retirement liabilities are usually updated by an actuarial firm on a 2-year cycle. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. You can see that the most recent valuations available from January of 18, our retirement liability is just over $105 million. Our OPEB liability is calculated every year under new accounting standards, and you'll see these numbers reflected on our audited financial statements. And you can see that the most recent update for our OPEB liability is July of this year, and it's $70.4 million. OPEB, for those that may be watching at home that aren't familiar with it, it's just an acronym that means other post-employment benefits. It's generally the future liability cost for health insurance benefits for retirees. And so it looks at all of the active employees that are working for the town in all different capacities. One day they'll be retired and they'll be receiving health insurance benefits. So that's the whole concept in a nutshell. if we look at the change from the prior valuation, because we haven't had an update yet on retirement, the increase is zero. Our OPEB liability has increased $3.5 million. In talking with our actuarial consultant, that's an expected amount based on the number of employees that we have and the fact that everyone's aging and moving 1 year closer to retirement. Going to the next slide, the 2-year cycle where Middlesex County Retirement System does an actuarial update, that helps determine our retirement assessments that are charged to the town. So the last one that was done in January of 2018 helped develop the assessment numbers for this fiscal year and for the next one coming. And the assumed rate of return for the retirement system was about 7.5%. The next actuarial valuation that's coming next year will be calculated as of January 1st, 2020, and that's going to determine our fiscal year 22 and our fiscal year 23 assessments. And it's likely, although no decision has been made, that the rate of return, the assumed rate of return, will likely decrease about 1/4 point. And that's just, that's something you see a lot in this industry, is people are trying to become more conservative with, with assumed investment projections. When you look at the Middlesex County Retirement System, I mentioned the current assumed rate of return is 7.5%. It assumes the system will be fully funded by 2035. Now, if we were back in 2000, we were talking about 2035. It sounds like a long time, but now we're here in 2019. It's only it's not that far away. When you look at the returns for the Middlesex County Retirement System, it's important to look at, there's a market rate of return. Almost all of their funds are invested with the Pension Reserves Investment Trust with the Commonwealth of Mass. But I wanted to point out, if you look at the past 3 years, you have a market return. And we all know from the investment world that market returns fluctuate year to year. What they do is the actuary has a smoothing formula where you only recognize a portion of a gain or loss that you earn in 1 year over multiple years. And that's actually a good thing for the town, because if you didn't do that, you would have spikes in the assessment. If you had a really good year, times would be great. If you had large losses like we saw in the market in 2008, that would cause a spike in the assessment, and we don't want that. And Middlesex doesn't want that as well. This next slide I know many of you have seen before. This is a 10-year history of the Middlesex Retirement System assessment. And the reason we show this slide a lot is it basically breaks out what goes into the large number that we pay to Middlesex County. And if you look at that first column, normal cost is the cost of providing retirement benefits to all of the folks that are actually retired and no longer in public service. The column that you see over here, the one that's marked payment on unfunded liability, that's where really the growth has been over time. In fact, if you look at next year's assessment, you can see that about 84% of the amount we're paying is a payment on the unfunded liability. The normal cost has really not gone up that dramatically over time. And the good thing about the 2-year cycle is that when the town manager and I are planning the coming year's budget, we don't have to try to make a projection on the Middlesex number. It's a known number at this point. So for fiscal year 21, it will be $9.51 million. So that's a known cost. Part of this, I know we've talked about it at previous meetings. I don't want to belabor the point. The payment on the unfunded liability is going up because before the 1980s, basically towns only paid the normal cost. They did not have to worry about trying to, fund an unfunded liability for retirement. If we go to the next page, let's see here we are. Just look at the OPEB liability for a minute. So, as I mentioned earlier, it increased $3.5 million since the last actuarial evaluation. The discount rate here is a little bit different because it goes by what our the asset allocation of our investments, and our actuary calculates that for us, and we're using 7%. This is more than what we had when we first started funding OPEB, because now we're on a regular schedule of investments. And then I thought I'd just cover a little bit about the investment the investment history and how things have gone. At the close of the last fiscal year, the balance in the trust fund was just over, it's about 10.44 million. We now are up to a funding ratio of just under 15%. And the numbers that I have on there to illustrate, this is the value of the town of Chelmsford making these contributions into OPEB. If you look at, for fiscal year 17, 18, and 19, if you look at the investment earnings that we earned on the trust, it was just over $2 million. So that's $2 million that didn't have to come from, tax revenue, whatever the various sources of revenue that we have. So as our OPEB liability trust is growing, we're generating bigger returns. Of course, it does. We have gone through a period where the stock market, and the investment work have been very robust, and we can't expect that every year. But I just wanted to point that out. And the OPEB, I wanted to take a moment just to talk about our funding plan and the history where we've been. Fiscal year 19 was the 8th year that we made a $1 million contribution from the general fund. Fiscal year 20, we, as everyone knows from previous joint meetings and town meetings, fiscal year 20 was a little different in that we had about a $500,000 savings on health insurance. Health insurance premiums went up by a very modest amount. Under 1%. So we were able to redirect that savings and use it to try to slowly increase our OPEB contribution. So the actuary has worked out a plan with us where we would have, of course, a $1.5 million contribution this fiscal year, and it escalates 3% a year. And the good news is that I know we've talked about this subject for a long time. Our OPEB liability, if we stay on this plan, is projected to be fully funded by 2044. So I know that does seem like a long time from today, but just a few years ago, we were not able to stand here, and I was not able to stand here and say that. So that's one bit of good news. I know when you receive a report from our auditors, they may touch on that. So that's a quick summary. If there's any questions, I'll be glad to try to answer those.
And in fact, our auditors are scheduled to present at your next meeting in 2 weeks on the 18th. They'll be presenting the financial audit report, and you'll see this information incorporated into that report.
John, are a lot of towns funding the way we're funding?
It depends. Some of your wealthier communities in the state are fully funded or have been for a while. I think we're on a really good path now. A lot of places. I don't want to speak for everybody, all the other communities, but I think a lot of people are trying to do just smaller token contributions, or if they receive one-time revenue. Maybe like from a settlement or something, they're trying to redirect some of the communities. For example, this doesn't apply to Chelmsford, but some of the communities that are, have talked about trying to redirect tax money earned on the sale of cannabis into their OPEB fund, because they're seeing it as a new source of revenue. But at least this, the town manager and I met with the actuary and talked with them, and this is, to me, we're on a reasonable plan now. I know probably 5 to 6 years ago, we talked about, having to try to contribute huge sums of money that weren't really affordable, and it didn't seem realistic. So, obviously the numbers will escalate over time, but I think we're on a fiscally responsible path now to try to do this without impacting the budget severely.
I think Westford is on a similar schedule now. They're funding close to our annual level, and I think we're seeing some inroads in some of our other comparable communities as well.
Yeah. Good job. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
All right. Mike. Podium it is.
Why not? I don't get over here that much, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Mr. Chairman. This evening, what I was bringing to you is an update from the Traffic Safety Committee. What we've been doing, we've been meeting once a month at least. The committee consists of the manager, Chiefs Spinney and Ryan, Gary Persichetti, and Steve Youngley of DPW, and Lieutenant Spence has been coming along, as well as myself. If you could go to the first slide. So as you recall, when we had our traffic input session back on June 12th, we had over 60 different issues that were raised that evening. So I took upon myself to break those down basically by the category that they fell in. And as you can see, the vast majority fell in the North Chelmsford, Ledge Road, Dunstable Road, Groton, and Swain Road truck issue, followed by traffic flow, general enforcement. There was some signage issues that came up along with Route 110, pedestrian traffic, Mill Road, Turnpike Road, and Elizabeth Drive, as well as specific issues that were directed towards other state agencies. So what we've been doing as we meet each month, we've been trying to look at how we can address each of these. As you can imagine, there were a lot of duplicate complaints in many instances. There were numerous ones, specifically for the North Chelmsford truck issue. Almost 24 were identical. If you would please, Mr. Manager. So given that that was the biggest issue that evening, I just want to go over what we've been doing. As you all know, we've talked several times here at various Board of Selectmen meetings. I've had extensive conversations with Mass DOT about getting a heavy commercial vehicle exception in numerous locations in towns, primarily in North Chelmsford. And they've indicated that without a viable alternative, which would require cooperation from our adjoining communities, that that's not going to happen. So what the committee has been doing, and we've been bringing it back to the board, is looking at options that we could do to mitigate the situation out there, as well as try and improve it going forward. So to mitigate the issues, Chief Spinney has deployed several traffic what do I want to call it, employment engagement details out there for enforcement of the trucks and speeding in general. We've also had the state police truck team come out and do a deployment, which was successful in checking the weight of the trucks on those roads. And we've been looking at other options, as you know, with town council. Next slide, please. With regard to Ledge Road specifically, you did ask us to look at a school bus turnaround at Ledge and Oak Hill, which would be the circle. Yellow line being Route 3, and the circle here being the area where Ledge and Oak Hill meet together. And Steve Yonley, who's the Assistant DPW Director, has indicated that that would cost approximately $62,000, which would include site work, drainage, curbing, easements, and contingencies. We've also looked at sidewalks in the area. As you know, we talked about that at the last meeting, which could cost over $200,000. We've also evaluated roadway improvements at Ledge and Dunstable, which would require some engineering costs as well as potential property taking, which would be right at that telephone pole in that first photograph. We also explored the alternate ingress-egress on the west side of Route 3, which went to Mr. Rand's question. He did leave, I did notice. It ties in. I know we specifically looked at whether or not we could create a road through those properties, starting at Newport Materials and working down to Route 40. But in essence, to answer Mr. Rand's question, we would have to go through those same parcels of land to build an on-ramp to Route 3. And one of the primary hurdles there was the land that is owned by Mass DOT. And we did approach State Representative Tom Golden, who then had us get in contact with the state, and the state said at this point unequivocally that that was not an option that they were willing to look at, allowing the town to get an egress through their land. So I can rephrase the question to them to see if they want to do the on-ramp, but my earlier attempts to float that were received in the same way.
You know, my thoughts on the on-ramp, off-ramp are, it's a bigger issue than that, because if you're getting on there and you got to go north, that means you go down to Route 40, get off,
Right.
get back on, head north. If you're coming north and you want to get there, that means you got to go up one more exit, get off, turn around, and come back.
Mhm.
Otherwise, you got to put an on-ramp, off-ramp on the north,
Right.
on-ramp, off-ramp on the south. I can't see DOT wanting to have those
Right, and
trucks
that's
going down
why
and up all those off-ramps.
in informal conversations, it did not appear to be feasible, so we did not really explore that so much as we looked at the option of getting the private property owners to work together, which they all indicated an interest and a willingness to sit down at the table, but the sticking point was getting the state to allow us to use that land.
There's no way to skirt around that land?
I could resume those conversations. It would primarily involve Newport Materials and Mr. Rivard.
Right.
That would make the connection, the name of the street is Ward Way would be the egress at that point. So, and nothing precludes those two individuals from sitting down and talking amongst themselves. I was just facilitating the conversation of getting everybody together, including the state at the table for the other option.
You said it would be Ward, oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
One of the things that we've been doing since I came here was monitoring the traffic along Ledge Road in several key areas in town. And I got my last traffic counts from NIMCOG last week, and they are reflected in the far right-hand column. And what you can see over time, the May 2017, that was the really last count that we have prior to Newport starting up the facility up there at the end of Ledge Road. So in that first, the extreme left-hand side of the screen, you can see that in that traffic count, over 70% of the traffic was conventional passenger vehicles, and roughly 29% was truck. And now if we move, if you notice, there's a slight change. I'll have to move away. They changed the mechanism in which they were counting the vehicles. You see a third column that appears in the third and fourth counts in blue, which is other. Those are vehicles that are not falling into the standard classifications. However, I've been told that more likely than not, those are trucks. So if you were to add the blue to the red on those last two, you would see the trend of trucks going up over time. So back in 2017, you had 29% trucks on Ledge Road, and then it went up to 47. Although officially we have 43%, it's more like you had 53 in November 2000 and now 2018. And now if you take that 46 and add the 12, it's more like you have 66% of the trucks. The vehicles are not passenger vehicles on Ledge Road.
Is that still 53?
It's 46
46
and 12%.
plus 12. Got it. I'm not reading
Because
right.
more likely than not, the blue is trucks because they're not coming in as passenger vehicles and they're not following. And that could be a misread. That's what NIMCOG has told me. But nevertheless, the truck traffic has been increasing all along. And so there is a significant problem, and it's only been getting worse. Now, to Mr. Rand's point that it's going to get worse next year, there's not going to be asphalt vehicles coming out that back road. That's part of the agreement, and that's one of the misconceptions. Now, if they continue to ramp up their gravel and their aggregate business, you may see more trucks. I don't know where it will cap off, but the trend is going upward. So. One of the other major issues was general traffic flow, and it's something that's hard to target, but a lot of the questions seem to gear towards the center of traffic during the key hours. And as we mentioned last week, the proposal that the committee is putting forward is as follows. This yellow line indicates the traffic flow that would start at what most of us called Four Corners or Erickson's Corner, or 50 years ago, Chicken Corner, some people called it. That traffic that wants to move westbound onto Route 110, the light right in front of the Unitarian Church, instead of having the green signal now and the green arrow, would now have a flashing yellow arrow, which would help with the traffic flow and also avoid any potential accidents that have happened. The other big change that we would see here is that we would be blocking off traffic from Westford Street coming in by the flagpole and merging in onto North Road heading southbound. And this causes a problem in the morning. Not only does it disrupt the traffic flow in the rightmost lane as you're heading south, but in certain instances you have people coming off of Westford Street trying to cross two lanes so that they can come down and take a left onto Route 110. So that is becoming a problem. So the proposal is to take the traffic on Westford Street and direct it down Academy to the signal in green. So that's something that we're suggesting to the board.
Open the door.
So, Mr. Chairman, that's one of the things that we would be looking for the board's input to go forward on making these changes. And we can try it on a temporary basis to see how it works, but we believe utilizing the signalization at Academy, prohibiting the traffic from cutting across and stopping the traffic flow once they get the green light in the center, as well as changing the yellow signal, should improve the situation in the center at the key times of day when the traffic is heaviest.
Are you going to look at the traffic light timing at Academy?
That would be something that we would have to do once we start. So everything would be in flux, and we would obviously tailor it to work at its best, maximum potential for moving the traffic through.
Okay.
I should also note that there have been a couple of questions that came in at the June 12th meeting, as well as subsequent to that, regarding the signalization in front of the Fisk House, right there at the Four Corners. And what Deputy Director Yanley has indicated is part of the problem is the signalization in front of the Unitarian Church. If someone is coming off the bike path or at the pedestrian crosswalk and they hit that button, it alters the timing of that light. And consequently, if someone coming up from Fishbones has a green light and they want to take the left, traffic backs up because the sequence is no longer set the way it should be because there's been an interruption. This can also happen if you have an emergency vehicle coming down Route 4 South and it heads down towards the library. The Opticom system can trigger a change in the traffic light and disrupt that pattern. So you no longer have the lights in the center all in sequence, allowing for normal traffic flow. That's something that at this point in time we don't have a good solution for with regard to the Opticom. And there may be another slide here in a minute to discuss pedestrian issues, but we do not have a significant traffic island in the middle that will allow us to change the timing. So with regard to general traffic flow as well, there was some questions about some of the intersections. The chief reviewed some of them, including this one is at Graniteville and School Street. There was a question whether that should have a flashing red. The crash data as well as the call data didn't support that at this time, but what DPW did, and it's a little bit hard to see in this, sightline improvements were made. That's a hedgerow. If you can imagine, there's actually two tiers in the hedge. They cut down the hedge to create a line of sight to see that stop sign from about 50 yards back. We have investigated some questions about having the heavy commercial vehicle exceptions on a lot of other side streets. Once that conversation came up with regard to Ledge Road, and then recently when we obtained them for Carlton and Sprague Avenues, more people have inquired about it. And what I've said to a lot of these folks, the occasional truck traffic doesn't warrant it. You may have a few more trucks than you'd like to see on your side streets, but you really have to have the volume, and then once you have the volume, you have to have a significant percentage, closer to 7-8% of your regular heavy volume becoming truck traffic. So few people see occasional cut-through traffic through Waze or some of the other applications that you'll find on your handheld devices. That doesn't necessarily warrant a heavy commercial vehicle exception. And for the record, once we did receive those, one of the first things I did after notifying UPS was I did send emails to the traffic notification systems on Waze, on Apple Maps and Google Maps to let them know that we're putting in these truck route alternatives and exceptions, so that hopefully these will be added to everybody's phones, so right away these trucks will stop using those side streets. As I indicated, we did get the heavy commercial vehicle exceptions on Carlton and Sprague, and we did refer the Stedman Street turn lane request to Mass DOT. You may recall that some people had inquired about the backup on Stedman Street coming down towards Route 110 across from Moonstones, that if we could, towards the end, have a right turn only lane, which would help with the traffic backup and maybe create a better flow. I've talked to Mass DOT. They just got back to me today and asked me to submit a formal request in writing, more so than just emails, which I'll be doing later this week. So, Enforcement was a big issue. What I did there was I spoke with Chief Spinney. On the left, you have townwide data since January of this year. What's important to note is Chief Spinney had indicated that since this time last year, motor vehicle stops have been up and citations have been up and motor vehicle accidents have been down. And that's in part due to the request for enforcement. I put a picture of one of our cruisers as well as the signboard. The signboard has been moved around town. We have two types of signboards. We have the trailerable one. We also have telephone pole mounted ones. And as requests have come in since June from various neighborhoods, we've tried to deploy it as often as possible. Those signboards also generate traffic data. So that's been part of the speed studies in the right-hand side, but you should be familiar with the middle column by now. We've talked about it more than once here, but that is the data from the speed deployments that the chief had done up in the North Chelmsford area around Ledge, Dunstable, Swain, and Groton Road. The areas of focus have been Stedman Street. That was one of the primary requests. There was a traffic study also done on Route 110. There's been a lot of enforcement and presence in the school zones as well as Chelmsford Center most recently to try and mitigate the issues with blocking of the intersection. And as I indicated, we've been deploying those signboards as requested by the various neighborhoods. One of the other major topics was signage and signalization. As was asked by Selectman Crocker Timmons, the DPW has been improving some of the timing sequences of the lights, the ones at North and Parkhurst and the ones at North and Dalton. I've asked Mass DOT to look at the timing of the lights at Glen Ave and Route 110 right in front of the Market Basket. DPW is reviewing existing signage around town. Specifically, we've had requests around the library. They said they're going to look at that for possible reduction. They're going to do that in conjunction with some of the branding, downtown branding signs that are going to be coming up. So as we're introducing some of that new signage, we're going to try and take out some of the old signage. The fire department, we spoke to Chief Ryan, said he's going to look at the timing of the flashing red light in front of the center station. We had some questions regarding the timing of that because there seems to be some people that don't want to wait and they've been cutting through the side neighborhoods. So that's going to be under review. And Chelmsford Police is, as I've said, has reviewed some of the intersection questions that have come in. At this point, they've found no changes are warranted.
Mike, what about the, at North and Parkhurst? In one of our previous get-togethers, where there was a discussion about putting a left-hand arrow as you head southbound, and I thought that we had said, or you had updated me that looked possible.
Yes, and that's something that Gary Persichetti said that they were going to take care of, and I'm not sure if
they've ordered it. It's just
yes.
they haven't arrived yet.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
There were a couple of questions about Route 110, Littleton Road, specifically related to aggregate. As you know, not only on June 11th, but there have been members of the public that have come to this meeting in open session to talk about it. So I had taken some of the complaints and comments that were made at both sessions, the public session here as well as our June 12th session. I've had conversations with Mass DOT and Mass DEP about the situation at aggregate. I've also had direct conversations with some of the executives at aggregate, and we've been talking collectively about what can be done out there. Mass DEP looked at it and said at this time that that aggregate was in compliance. Mass DOT said that they were going to perform their own traffic study, which is ongoing, relative to the complaint that the trucks are going too fast. Chelmsford Police did an informal study in the late summer and indicated that they're not seeing excessive speeds out there. Aggregate has been willing to cooperate, indicating that they've been advising their drivers not to take the turn into town, and they were going to put out another sign out there. I spoke to the Board of Health, and they went out recently and investigated noise issues as well as looked for some of the odor complaints. We did have a windy day not too long ago with heavy cloud cover, And we did have one complaint that came in, and it's the first one I've had in a while. It came in from the other side of 495 over on the Pine Hill area of an odor of what appeared to be asphalt. I did speak to Aggregate. They said that the plant was not running that day, but that they had stored asphalt and materials that they were cleaning out of essentially a silo and putting into some trucks, which may have generated the odor. But that is often dependent upon the prevailing winds where that odor does go to. So that resident called, we immediately went out and looked at it. It did not appear to be an issue of them actively producing asphalt. There has been an allegation that they may have contaminated the wetlands, and that's something that we will be working on with conservation. I referred it to conservation, but as you know, our conservation agent is out at the moment on leave. One of the other big issues has been sidewalk and pedestrian safety. As I alluded to earlier, our center crosswalk, where we have the bike path, which is right in front of the Unitarian Church, currently bicycle and pedestrian traffic can utilize those crosswalk buttons, and the Opticom feature of the police, fire, and the ambulance can affect the timing sequence of that center traffic signal right there. Consequently, as I said, that can affect the sequence of the other lights over at the four corners. So DPW said they would continue to review that and see what, if any, improvements can be made. The first step, as I indicated, would be to change the Westford Street, Academy Street, as well as the yellow. And hopefully that will help mitigate the problem that we're seeing there. But if you look, according to Assistant DPW Director Yonley, this is not long enough for us to have an island so that we could have a shorter sequence so that the pedestrians could get here and congregate here, and then in the next sequence go across. So because it's not wide enough, we have to have a longer timing sequence which holds up the vehicular traffic. So that's the issue we're faced with at the moment.
Would it help to have that crosswalk go to where the flagpole is and then over to Brick House? Or is it Bruce Friedman Trail, did they
Rail
dictate?
trail, yeah,
It's the rail.
They dictated where that is?
Well, people won't go, they'll just cut across. I mean,
Yeah, but the rail trail does pick up almost over by the left hash mark in front of Brick House. Because you get across and then you gotta go over to, see where the hash mark is?
You want to go over and across.
Yeah, but the entrance to the rail trail is right there.
Yep.
So I'm wondering, could you make them go to the flagpole and then come across, and then they could congregate?
You're gonna ask them to do an area.
In Westford Street
Yeah.
to get there, so you cross it.
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to be crossing either way, but
Well, I've noticed that when people press that, it stops every direction. Why not make that whole intersection be a crosswalk? You know, so people don't have to stay specifically on that crosswalk, you know what I mean?
Shut down every line of traffic.
Well, it does now.
I guess it does.
And that has that ripple effect to the other lights until the sequence resets itself.
Right. But see what Pat's saying is if it's all shut down anyways, why not just make the whole intersection a crosswalk so they could go from
Wherever.
one to the flagpole to Brick House to across the walk, like everything moves at once.
Effectively, you'd make a crosswalk on North Road, which there isn't one now, but there's no reason it couldn't be.
If the whole intersection shut down, why make them cross
Yeah.
one way and then another? If they want to just walk right across over to the flagpole,
especially where if you're coming out of the Unitarian Church here, and I've done this with my daughters because I've had to park over across the other way, you cross down to Brick House, then you cross a parking lot, and then you cross. So it's actually, it's kind of dangerous, and if you have little kids, it makes it that much more unpredictable, or small dogs, or whatever. Whereas I think what Pat is saying is super sensible in that because it's shutting down anyway, you might as well just make it all and let people run, go the way they need to go more directly, rather than taking 2 or 3 light cycles to get across, which is what happens right now. There's no way to get across North Road effectively. You got to go around.
following us, Mike? Want me to get up and draw it?
Yeah, I can, but I'm wondering, the more places that you put buttons, the more people can.
Don't put any more buttons.
Oh,
don't
you
need
just
any
wanna
more
have a
buttons.
crosswalk?
Just crosshatch it, the whole intersection, so that it's like one
Because
massive crosswalk.
You already have buttons.
Yeah.
Yeah, you do. You have 1, 2, 3, 4 sets of buttons right now.
you were asking for something.
No.
Well, no, but if you
Make a
if
triangle.
you make the whole area there, so you make it like that, what you're gonna do, because it's stopped anyway.
Yeah.
So what you're gonna do is make it really easy to.
Because right now, someone hits a button, they walk over in front of Brick House, then they hit a button again to cross back over to where the CCA is, to get back onto that side.
So
If you were to just put a diagonal one across and everything in between is a gridded crosswalk, they push the first button by the flagpole and can walk over to get back to the CCA side.
So I will bring it back and we can have a discussion, because I'm not well versed in pedestrian laws and crosswalk hashing, so.
That's fine.
Can ask DPW officials. It's probably better suited for them to answer it. Okay. Below, I put one of the new flashing beacons. As you know, at the most recent town meeting, we're going to have these placed at our school zones. DPW has indicated they're going to be performing ongoing maintenance to the existing sidewalks. That would most likely happen next season. There was several questions and comments about issues with some of the sidewalks. I did check with DPW and the sidewalk requests that came up at the traffic study for Maine and Sherman. They've been placed on the list for future consideration. When the time allots for it, they'll do it. And I did reach out to Mass DOT about the sidewalks for Littleton Road. They did get back to me this week and asked me to put a more formal letter in place, and I'll coordinate with you, Selectman Antul, if you want to give me an idea of where you want them to go, and we'll send that back.
Hey, Mike, I'm jumping back. I've been so following, I missed one of my questions back when you were at Ledge. Probably don't have to scroll, but just quickly. At the end of Ledge, we had discussed putting a left-hand turn only sign, and it was said that, well, you can't do that because it forces traffic into into Tingsboro and then into Westford, and that the state doesn't allow it. How does Westford get away with putting a left-hand turn sign when you come out of the asphalt plant, which forces traffic into Chelmsford?
Well, they claim that's part of the permit in the negotiations. I posed that question to Mass DOT, and I essentially received a non-answer.
Because they said it's a driveway, it's not a roadway.
Well,
that's their explanation.
I claimed
Westford
it was a
permitted
de facto heavy commercial vehicle exclusion, and they said that maybe I should ask that question of my town council. They wouldn't confirm or deny that it was a truck exclusion, but it's part of the permit that was negotiated between the parties. So it doesn't apply to all trucks, it just applies to the trucks coming out of Newport. I know, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but.
All right, anyways, carry on.
There was several questions about the Turnpike Mill and Elizabeth Road area. One of the biggest ones, the line of sight improvements at the intersection of Turnpike and Mill. And as some of you are aware, you may have been down in that area. DPW did go down and clear the end and make improvements. This is a recent photograph showing how the brush has been cleared back. There's been improvements to the walls in the area. There's going to be new signage placed out at least on Turnpike, pointing out stop ahead, and some of the existing signage that's out there is going to be updated with newer, more visible signs. The other area of interest out there was Elizabeth Road at Mill, and that's going to be restriped. There was some questions of, do people know what lane they're in and where they're supposed to turn off of Mill up to Elizabeth, so that will be addressed.
We had a quick conversation about connecting Elizabeth and Stewart.
I do
Under
not
the
have
power
an
lines.
answer for that at this time, but I'll work on that.
Thank you.
The category that I put, federal, state, other agencies, we had a request to improve the railroad crossing at School Street. We coordinated, DPW and I talked to Pan Am Railways. Pan Am said they would do it as long as we could help out, and Joe Erickson over at DPW was very good in coordinating with them, and that was fixed earlier this summer. If any of you had been over it, they had put temporary wooden blocks, railroad ties, which did not meet evenly, which I'm sure ruined a few suspensions in the last few months, but right now it's perfectly flat and smooth. There were several questions relative to the bridge construction on North Road over in East Chelmsford by Gorham Street as well as Westford Street. Mass DOT has informed us that on North Road, the completion is set for May of 2020. You'll see right now that they're getting ready for striping. Gorham Street's set to begin in spring of 2022, and Westford Street is in the preliminary design phase. I also wanted to point out there's a expansion joint right there that is a problem every year, but DPW has been fixing that and flattening that out to make that more passable. This is an overview of North Chelmsford, the Princeton Street and Middlesex coming into Vinyl Square. This is the fire station right here, and that's the Cottage Row crosswalk. I have had conversations with Mass DOT about this intersection to see if we could get a crosswalk and or the beacons, something that would address the petition that was submitted back on June 12th, and that they've indicated preliminarily that there's not sufficient crash data at that intersection, nor does it appear that we may have the pedestrian traffic to warrant an immediate improvement. So I've spoken to NIMCOG. Next year when the weather's warmer, we will perform a pedestrian traffic study, which is really a visual study. Somebody's going to sit out there. It's not like you can drop tubes down, so you're going to have to look for pedestrians, bicyclists. They're looking for roughly over 100 an hour in order to warrant an immediate improvement, and I don't know that we will get 100 people an hour on average throughout most of the day, and unless
We've tried.
I was going to say.
I mean, we can stack the deck.
But there may be other ways.
We'll have a parade.
And I'm brainstorming with NIMCOG. The other thought was if we do wind up making improvements to the North Station, the fire station there, that it could be wrapped up into a project like that. So there may be other ways to address it, but for right now, it's not something that Mass DOT would be taking on. And I believe we did try and ask if Selectman Golden, because it's part of his district, could...
Representative.
What did I say?
Selectmen.
Well, I think you people are very important, so I like to think of you as, on par with him.
This is a location where we're putting one of the flashing lights, though, right?
No.
Right. No.
No? This
No.
was
State road.
It's a state road.
Oh,
Because I've actually seen people zip by and not let the fire trucks out.
Yep.
And they didn't have their lights on, but I mean, so.
I mean, Selectman Crocker Timmons and I both live in West Chelmsford.
Yeah.
And daily I try and cross School Street and Main Street and some of the other crosswalks up there. People are not paying attention during the day. Without a yellow light or something else there, at least in my neighborhood, I think it's just everywhere that without those visual cues, people aren't seeing the pedestrians. They're not looking for them. They're too busy. I did an informal count. I do it often on Saturdays. Usually 4 out of 5 cars passing me as I'm walking have their hands full with a phone or some other electronic device as they're driving. Oftentimes they're not even looking. So, and that's just informal. So I get the necessity for having the beacons there. So we'll look at it. The only other thing that I put down below there is no changes to the location of the Route 3 and 495 interchanges. We did have some people come that evening as well as submit questions afterwards. Could we relocate the interchanges along Route 3 and Route 495? That's going to take a significant act of the state legislature, Mass DOT, and probably federal agencies to do that. People keep questioning why we have essentially half a clover leaf at North Road, because if you think about it, you can only get off going eastbound on 495, and you can only get on or northbound and get on going southbound. You can't do it on the opposite side of the road. So people always ask, can we eliminate that so that we can, hopefully mitigate the issues that we have on North Road? Well, we can at this time, so we will have those lights.
They just redid the intersection.
No, I know.
So
Well,
my
that's
guess
it.
is
I
that-
mean,
I've been talking
hopefully
about that
those
for 10
lights will
years.
help improve the traffic flow there, but there's no way that we as the town are going to improve those. So that is an update from what we've been doing since June. I will look at the Elizabeth Road issue, and I'll circle back on the issues with regard to the sidewalks. And if you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer.
And you talked to town council about the left in Westford versus the, or have you already spoken to them about? Yeah. Okay.
So as far as the traffic flow in around the common on Westwood Street and
We would
Academy,
be,
do you want a vote from us?
yes, I would look for your support so that we can initiate that. So have DPW go forward and change the signalization, and then we would block off the end of Westford Street as well as redirect the traffic down Academy Street.
Okay, well, I'll make a motion that we direct the Assistant Town Manager to move forward with the proposed improvements noted for the general traffic flow around the common and the turn arrow in front of the Unitarian Church as presented.
Second?
A motion and a second. All in favor? Aye.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
So I was wondering about the asphalt plant on Route 110 and how old it is, if you know?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I've lived in town for 50 years, and as long as I remember, I grew up by Pine Hill. I always remember it being there, and you could hear the hum of that act. I don't know. Chief? 50, 60, I think. Yeah, 50 or 60 years. Yeah.
Okay. And does it meet current standards, or has it been grandfathered into previous standards?
Zoning standards or?
EPA.
Oh, yeah, it has to meet,
Yeah.
it has to be EPA.
Has to be
standards.
current.
Yeah.
So as I indicated, when I spoke to Susan Rook, is I want to say the district supervisor for DEP. I believe that's her title. She'd indicated that they, if there was an immediate problem, they would be out and taking care of it and taking action. They've worked with them over the years. Their goal is compliance, and she indicated that they are working with them anytime there's an incident. So if there's something that's brought to our attention, we immediately notify them. So for all intents and purposes, from my conversations, they are in compliance.
Okay. Then I don't have a third question.
Okay.
Thank you.
I mean, if I were to find something to the contrary, I would let you know at the next meeting.
No, it's just something someone said to me in a phone conversation, so I was just checking.
If you want to contact me offline, I can
Yeah.
direct the specific question to somebody. All right, thank you.
All right, so section 7 is the town manager's evaluation form. Just to go back, this was,
This is really just goals, not the evaluation form.
I'm sorry, goals, sorry, the goals update. And this was something that I wrote back in, I don't know, it must have been May, to sort of get a clear idea of when we lay out the goal, to define the expectation and what we would consider the results that we're looking to derive by the goal. And it's kind of kicked around, I guess, a little bit. And Pat, you've sort of taken the comments and sharpened them up. So this is where we are. Does anybody have any comments about it? Particularly Paul.
Well, I know as part of his reports, he's going to be reporting on
Yeah, I'll touch on a
his-
number of them as part of my report. What does it mean if things are bracketed? You know, I guess the changes are obviously in gray, and
Is that what the yellow is? That's the changes?
Oh, I didn't have it in color. Yes, I think the yellow was the update and the changes from the last time we looked at this.
Would it make sense to bounce these against, as Paul goes through his
Yeah.
presentation, to just sort of do it simultaneously? We can figure out what makes sense.
We can do that?
Does that make sense to you, Paul?
sure.
Okay. So then that would bring us to, well, one of the,
What do you
one
want
of
me to
the,
do, number 8?
yeah, well, I was gonna jump, but the first one that's on here was develop an overarching vision and values and mission statement, which I noticed on number 8, it's Board of Selectmen vision mission statement. This was what I thought was a goal. and for us to work with you, Paul, on. So, that being said, this is, I mean, a lot of this was done by Virginia. Do you want to go over
Do you
what
want me
you?
to talk through it?
Yeah, if you could.
Sure. So, Mike, I'm on the handout for agenda item 8. So what I did was I just tried to lay out a recommended approach for this, which I think there's so much going on between now and the end of the year, it would make sense to look at after the first of the year. At the top of the page, you have the originally stated objective. And then the little table just provides some context. When you're talking about things like vision, values, mission, that's the strategic thinking of the why. Why do you exist? Why are you doing things the way you want to do them? And then that in turn flows down into goals and actions. So this is something that would help provide a structure for the goals that we set year to year, depending on how many years the overall strategy spreads. So my recommendation is that initially we focus just on the vision and the values at the town level, and not there was a statement when we originally put this in place for the mission, but there's a lot of mission statements that already exist amongst many boards and committees and departments in the town. And I just for reference, I pulled out the current Board of Selectmen mission statement from our policies document. So if we look at just making this initial effort to establish the vision and values at the town level, my thought here was to establish a 7-person committee, which would have three Board of Selectmen, Paul and Mike, and then 2 residents at large. And then from a process standpoint, when you're talking about a vision and values for the town, I thought it was important to allow people who live in the town to provide input. So we could do an electronic survey with some very pointed questions and allow people to provide input to the committee that way. I was suggesting in this that we have 2 public input sessions. The first would be similar to the survey, but in person for anybody who wanted to come, and we could let the precinct reps know about it by email. And it's just a facilitated session. If a lot of people show, it's not 100 people in a room get up to the microphone. If a lot of people show up, it's a very pointed questions you can have people answer at their group tables, capture their responses. The committee goes off and works with that and comes up with a draft vision and values. And then we have a second public input session where people can provide comment on what the committee came up with, and then finalize it. And the survey was something that really you could do it before the first public input session, or you could have the first one and then do it after for people who didn't have an opportunity to come. It would just be another way that they could provide input. But I think this could be done fairly efficiently. And again, it would allow people who live in the town to contribute to what they see as the future vision for the town and the values.
Any thoughts?
My question is, how does this tie into the master plan update? Or does it? Because that has sort of always been the every 10-year updated vision of how the town wished to be developed. Because that seems to be what the core of this all is about, whether you saw what happened at last week's town meeting or anything that goes on in the town, any kind of development project. I mean, so my sense is if we're going to do this, I just wonder how this interacts or coordinates with the master plan update that is now ongoing.
I think if we wanted to have participation from the master plan, we could, but the master plan is under the planning board. So I see that at a different level, whereas this would be like a vision and values for the town. The master plan isn't coming up with a set of value statements for the town.
Then what areas
It's,
beyond, what areas beyond development?
The master plan is largely about land use.
Exactly.
Right.
So what is it that you're looking to target beyond land use? Because that's all I've been hearing in this community for the last several weeks at town meeting, as well as for the last several years. It's all about maintaining the rural character of Chelmsford, or whatever the vision is. And I guess I'm trying to understand where you're looking to go for a vision and value that extends beyond development of the town. Because I think when I see the Board of Selectmen's current mission statement, I don't see that being changed. I mean, those are what I call the motherhood and apple pie type of things that I've used in the past. We want the highest possible quality of management and leadership. I mean, again, I don't see that modifying. What it all seems to come down to in Chelmsford are two things. How are the land uses being developed? And the second big one is, how are you lowering my property taxes? So I mean, what else are we looking at beyond those two things? That we're trying, I'm just trying to figure out, what are we trying to get at? And I'm not frustrated with you, Virginia. I'm not trying to thwart you. I'm not trying to do anything. I'm just trying to understand what we're trying to do here. What is it that we're trying to do with this core vision of values? What is it that, because it implies the fact that we're doing something, that there's something that needs to be modified. I'm trying to figure out what it is we're trying to get at. Because the third rail issues in Chelmsford in the 13 years that I've been here, have been land use development and taxes. And if there's something else that I'm missing, because I think I think the other ones are pretty much on the mark in terms of if it's a question of management and leadership. I don't kind of wondering what are we trying to get at with this goal? And if we're going to put a committee together and expect people to come out for public input sessions, what are we asking them to speak about that goes beyond either development or fiscal?
I think to assume that it's all development and fiscal is a tactical assumption.
Then explain to me what the other areas are. Okay, thank you. Okay.
When we talked about this initially, I don't know where to go to know what the vision statement is for the town of Chelmsford, or what the values are that drive our decisions and our behaviors. And so, Paul, this would be at a higher level, at the town level. And it gives an opportunity for the people who live in the town to weigh into where they see that vision for the future and what they would like to see as the stated values for the town.
But what might those include? I'm trying to understand what they would include.
But I see what Virginia's saying, though, because it would explain why we put so much money into a park. It would. The vision values would show, if someone were to Google Chelmsford and mission statement and want to know, I'm thinking about moving to Chelmsford, what are they about? And they would read a statement that says, we, love our conservation land, we have great parks, we have, phenomenal school systems, we have.
And this public input can be very pointed, because you're simply asking for input on. You can bound it by the questions you ask in terms of, like, how do you want to be seen by the residents? How do you want to be seen by businesses? And get people to provide that type of input. And then there's a similar type of question set you can ask for values. And so you're getting the input from the public on where they see the town, or where they would like to see the town in the future, 5, 10, 15 years from now, and input from the public on a set of values that are clearly stated, that, to Ken's point, start driving decisions and behaviors. And it provides a framework, against which to sanity check all these mission statements that we have. And it provides the framework, and I think, Paul, when we first brought this up, you said it too, that is then what ideally you're using as the framework for defining your goals year to year. Because you start necking it down from the top level into more specifics. So there are goals that come up because there are things that are happening that we know we need to address, but then what comes out of this process, if you start to do some more strategic thinking at the top level, or what are some of the specific goals, the school committee has a great example of this. If you look at they have, and they're updating it now, they have a vision and a values that they've laid out in their last strategic plan, and that is fairly solid. It's not something that necessarily keeps changing, but now what changes is the implementation of their goals from year to year for the next 3 years to support achieving that.
That's part of the accreditation process. That's the first thing you do when you sit down for that.
Accreditation or not, it's a very good
and every
plan.
so often you sit down and you look at it like word by word, comma by comma, do we like this word? And I have seen schools where they have sat down, looked at the vision statement and said, nope, that's really not the direction we're heading. That's not the direction we want to be heading. That's not our mission. This is we're throwing it out and starting all over again.
We're not going to chase schools. I mean,
Well, no, but-
when this concept came up earlier this year, I mean, I never really had given it much thought until I sat down and started Googling, Wellesley, vision and goal. Oh, they have one. Newton, vision. Oh, there they are. And I said, well, geez, a lot of towns do have this. So that's why it became an interest.
I don't think it's going to be if we just keep it at the vision and goals for this step and see where that leads us. I think it can be done in a very pointed way and in a very efficient way, and you'll see whether there's value in it or not.
I think that this goes beyond just land use development. I think
Yeah.
this goes beyond like what do you want to do to make the community better? Like what are your goals for the community, and what do you want this community to be like?
Well, that's why we praise our veterans, and we're becoming age-friendly. I mean, we have those core values at our heart.
And how do we implement those?
So all I'm suggesting is let's articulate them.
But I guess I don't know a community that I've ever been to that doesn't value open space, doesn't value elders, doesn't want to see every child to achieve their maximum potential as an individual learner in this educational system. I guess I'm trying to figure out what it is that we're trying to get at, and then,
Maybe we're not trying to get anything. Maybe we just want to put it in writing.
promote public
Right.
safety. Okay, all right.
It's to me, it's just an open slate to just see what comes back and put it in writing, and it may be the thing. It's going to probably align with many of the things we already have, but we don't have it written down anywhere.
So it's 10 o'clock. Let's do this. It sounds a little bit like, Paul, you have some questions
No,
about
I
where
have no
it's
question.
going?
I think you should proceed with it. I'm not trying to be a stick in the mud by any means. I'm just trying to figure out what it is we're trying to get at. Somehow the town must have survived 360 some odd years without a clear vision and value statement. I'm just trying to figure out what it is, what problem we're trying to address. And
Well-
it sounds like the problem we're trying to address is that we don't have one.
The town probably could have survived 365
Yeah.
years with horses, but we have cars now.
All right, I'm just trying to understand what it.
It's not a problem we're trying to address. It's how
How do we
can
make
we
it
make
better?
things better? How do we take where we are and make it better?
What's our goal?
That's all.
What's
I
our
don't see a
vision for the future
problem.
and our mission? If it is just putter along,
Well, it's not
kind of
putter.
doing-
No, and I don't think
kind of
it's
doing,
and I don't think we've
half-hearted
been.
job
I don't
to-
think. Well, I think Emily. I think that's totally unfair.
Well, no,
And
but-
I think it's disrespectful for the 13 years that I've worked hard for this community to think that I've just putted along. Or this community has putted along. I think we have a tremendous track record of accomplishments in this community, that goes across the spectrum of the community. I'm just, in all honesty, trying to figure out what it is the issue that we're trying to address, because the fact that we have it as the number one
not an
goal
issue.
of the Board of Selectmen
We can make it
indicates.
number 10, Paul, if you want.
Yeah, it's
No,
not.
but I'm just trying to figure out
number
what it is.
Number one was not a priority, and there's no issue. It's
vision,
trying
like,
to-
what are we doing?
Yeah.
Like, what are we doing anywhere? Where is our goal long-term? People.
What's our nation's goal? I mean, I'm just trying to figure out what it is that we're trying.
Humanity's goal. I mean, like,
Right,
there's a
what's-
bigger question
what's
there.
the
Like,
meaning of
why are we
life?
not on Mars right now?
We're not
Why
going
have we
there.
not
We're not going
solved,
there tonight.
worldwide
just trying-
poverty?
All right,
But,
guys.
like, so
Anyways.
how can we bring that down
Well, let's
to
do this.
Okay.
Why don't we have,
how can we figure out what we're doing?
I think you should proceed with it.
Okay.
Put out the request for a committee, and I would
well,
glad to contribute. Michael,
we
too.
we had one conversation about it, and maybe we have a few more, and we sharpen this up a little bit and come up with some examples, and we move from there. But tonight, let's
Yep.
go on to your goals, or your update of your goals.
Given that we're now in November, more than halfway through the fiscal year, I thought it'd be appropriate to give the board an update on where things stand in terms of the goals that were laid out back in the spring when the board assembled. The first one we just touched upon, so we're not going to spend any time on that. We're still trying to develop this vision, values, and mission statements.
Although, I guess, but your comment there, to date, the members of the Board of Selectmen and the town manager have not met to develop.
Yeah,
That's a little untrue. I mean, we've had a few sort of discussions and gone-arounds on this
But
already.
you can clearly understand my lack of clarity of what we're trying to do here. The second one was to identify and track the parameters to monitor the effects of the split tax rate. Such parameters may include relevant assessors data obtained through the town's new business development initiatives and public input. And I'm pleased to report that I've established and I'm working with an ad hoc advisory committee composed of the following individuals: Board of Assessors Chairman Sam Chase, Business Development Director Lisa Maroney, Chief Assessor Frank Green, 2018 Tax Classification Committee Chairman Mike Rigney, and Economic Development Committee Chairman Donald Van Dyne. If you go to the next slide, the committee has met on 4 occasions. Our preliminary findings are that the split tax rate has not been in existence long enough to ascertain any meaningful impact. The sense of the group is that the Board of Assessors is not the proper authority to participate in determining the economic outcomes that may or may not be related to Board of Selectmen policy, and that abatement requests are not irrelevant in establishing the economic impact of a split tax rate. Although commercial industrial abatement requests are significantly higher in 2019, the first year of the split tax rate, the number of abatements did not increase. So you had additional abatement requests, but the number of abatements didn't increase. And therefore, this suggests that commercial property owners were reacting to the substantial tax increases that they received because of the 1.27 shift, and not because they were questioning the property valuations. Many other economic and business factors contribute to continued business vitality, as we sort of heard from Lisa earlier this evening, and it's hard to isolate these to determine the impact of just property tax. With the small commercial exemption in place, it may be easy to track the arrival and departure of small businesses in terms of numbers. So that's sort of where we are as a group. Like I said, we'll continue to meet and we'll update you.
When did
We've
you-
been meeting about monthly.
So you've met once a month for the last 4 months.
Well, yes, exactly. And we've got some additional, we're meeting again, I think, before Thanksgiving, and then we'll come back. Again, this was always seen as a multi-year goal. And we're trying to sort of get a handle on, well, how do we measure it? How can we provide guidance? What can we learn from other towns' experience and so forth?
I'm surprised when I saw this, because every person on that list, except for maybe Frank Green, I probably see or speak to weekly.
Yep.
And nobody's mentioned to me this committee.
Oh, go.
But you didn't. I didn't even know it was made, done, founded, started.
Well, again, it's an advisory
Fine.
committee to myself. We don't post, public agendas and that sort of thing. Sam Chase has taken meeting notes of those meetings. Again, the whole purpose of this thing is in reaction to the board's request.
Yep.
I can't speak to why they haven't discussed it with you.
Would there be a reason to? I mean, you know,
know.
it's up to you to give us
I don't
this
know.
update,
So let's go on to fire stations.
All right, the second one is assess the fire station combinations, numbers, and locations, understand the impacts or possible enhancements to respond times and safety of first responders. Obviously, as we saw earlier this evening, Travis Miller, doing business as Criterion Associates, presented the fire station location study earlier this evening, based upon the last 3.5 years, I guess, of response data for the fire department. And as he said, the next step will be the formation of a committee. The next goal is to provide egress from Vinyl Square Municipal Parking Lot to Watton Street. Michael was finally able to reach the property owner of 20 to 22 Watton Street. However, that owner is not interested in providing the town with an easement or a sale of the property for use as an egress from the municipal parking lot across from the privately owned adjacent property to Watton Street. One thing to be noted, and it sort of says in that sentence, this easement area wouldn't actually connect to town-owned land, it would connect to privately owned land. But that being said, the property owner wouldn't be interested in providing an easement. However, he did say he'd be willing to sell the entire parcel and buildings to the town. You're at that point, you're now into $500,000.
I think the assessed value was over 300,000, and the market value, if you looked at a Zillow or Realtor.com, it's a condo. It's 2 condo units in one dwelling. The fair market value is over $400,000.
He's willing to sell that?
Sure. But then what are we going to do with it? We're going to buy it, tear the building down, and make
No, I have no interest in that. Anyways.
But the adjacent private property owner has indicated a willingness to allow the town, should we acquire that, to make the connection. They said they would sit down. They were supportive of the idea. But the linchpin on all this is this property here. Otherwise we can't go through, or at least this point, due to the wetlands that on the town conservation land below. So that's
got it.
Problem.
And surely the adjacent property owner would be interested. It would only enhance the value of his property, giving him an outlet to Watton Street. The next one is to strengthen the leadership presence with and support the town's economic development initiatives with focus on the crossroads on Route 129, along with other areas of importance. Help evaluate communications about such initiatives and their progress. Effort should be given to all who vacant space or business needs. As we heard earlier this evening, Lisa Maroney provided a quarterly business development update to the board, and she also made an early one at the end of July. The Chelmsford Crossroads at 129 website is operational. As Lisa noted, we have issued a request for proposals for a $100,000 business amenity incentive grant. She coordinated the Art on the Brook event last month in the Center Village. Funding's been secured from town meeting for a building facade program in the Center Village in Vinyl Square. Lisa noted the numerous ribbon cutting ceremonies for small business promotion. And myself, Lisa, Evan Blansky, and others have promoted the redevelopment of the Oddfellows Fisk House site, which, as you know, is scheduled to appear before the planning board in the next meeting or two.
Paul, I meant to ask you, on the fire station thing, is there any input from permanent building?
Yeah, we're going to wrap them in, because if you're talking construction, which it's going to be, we need their expertise.
All right, sorry.
So they'll be brought in. The next one is to develop and initiate execution of a communications enhancement plan for the town and its residents. Research municipal websites and recommend implement new website with improvements. Continue efforts to improve community outreach efforts by utilizing social media, local news resources, and any other methods to provide our residents with up-to-date information. Once again, I've established a working group with an ad hoc committee consisting of Support Services Coordinator Christina Bruce, Town Clerk Patricia Doris, Assistant Library Director Brian Herzog, Business Development Director Lisa Maroney, and our Vice Chair of the Board of Selectmen, Pat Wojcik. We've researched other municipal websites, and we're on schedule to launch a new website in February. We're on schedule, as I noted. We sort of looked at the template. What we're really trying to do is focus on reaching people. I think you'll see, and we have brought on board most recent iteration is bringing on board Pete Padula and
And Sylvia.
Dan Sylvia from Telemedia. We think there are synergies that can be done there, as sort of noted about utilizing local news resources. That's probably today our most effective local news resource, given that our traditional print media resources are stretched very thin. Our Lowell Sun Reporter now covers 3 towns, Chelmsford, Westford, and Littleton. The Independent, as you know, covers many towns. And so we think that one of the keys is, again, outreach through social media, web presence, and also through telemedia in terms of better promoting. For example, last week we had town meeting. When in the revised vision and outreach, you'd have a notice on the news carousel of our website saying, "Hey, town meeting's coming up on, Session 2 is coming up on, Monday, October, whatever the date was." You then have a click here, watch last night's, town meeting session with a clear link to the telemedia broadcast of the meeting. You could have the next site being click here for voting results from the last sessions or sessions of town meeting, and then we're sort of going through it each department by department in terms of, here's what's going on with road construction today. Here's, you can just see how it traverses across departments and activities. But we're trying to be, pushing the information out because it's one of the concerns that, again, I hear, from members of this board. It's also a concern when I talk to my colleagues in other communities, is how do you reach people? So if there's a leaf collection day that's out there and that's pushed out there. It's also a website that's easy to find information. We're improving the filter on the website so that when someone does a search on leaf collection, that it doesn't give you a list of 84 different items. It brings you up to a prioritized list. So it's really trying to, but also recognizing that right now we're in an age where it's a visual medium, that people, aren't going to do 3 iterations to get to a piece of data, that it's got to be easily obtainable and pushed out to them. And if you look, that's where social media is going today, and this is what it also will be effectively utilized on mobile devices, which our website currently desperately needs to improve. So,
Paul,
so
why
that's going. That's
why is
ongoing.
Lisa Maroney on here?
Because it again involves the whole issue of business development, that the effectiveness of our website would tie into the core activities of the community, i.e. the town government, business development, and also the whole media aspect of it, and also same thing with the library. I mean, if you look at who has web presence in town, it's telemedia, the library, business development with their site. So we're really trying to draw synergies together so that they're integrated and coordinated. So that's, I think it's been an effective group. As Pat can probably attest, some of our conversations have probably gone on too long and have drifted. But I think in a way it's sort of helped sort of refine where it is we're trying to get at. We've seen some successful websites, not only in Massachusetts, but across the country. And at the same time, Telemedia is updating their website because they recognize that their website needs enhancements in terms of making it user-friendly.
So I think this is really important. In Ken's file, and when we first started talking about this, we had also talked about trying to get a sense for how people prefer to communicate, because like we've had people come to open sessions saying, I'm not on the internet, right? So like, is the committee looking at how do we communicate with maybe the part of our population that isn't website savvy or isn't going to use a website or social media?
No, this is a website committee.
This is a website committee.
As I mentioned earlier, I don't know how we reach people because if the print media is deteriorating,
yeah,
and they're not web savvy, we're really, and again, it's not just my sense, it's a sense when I talk to my colleagues, is how do you reach people, many of people who really aren't interested in being reached, quite frankly. That there, there's in most communities, there's probably about 5% of the population who's actively engaged in what's going on with the town government and activities. And the question becomes, how do you reach people who, aren't coming to your website, who aren't buying the local newspaper, who aren't really engaged with the community in terms of, because that's really not their particular area of interest, and we're struggling with that, and I know I'm struggling with that. How do I reach people? How do we reach people?
Because that's one of the things we had talked about was, should we do a survey card in the property tax bills or something, or an online survey for people who will respond that way, saying, well, how do you prefer to communicate? And just let them check a couple boxes and just get the data points. And I'm just asking because I'm seeing it here, and I don't know if we still think that's a good idea or if we just want to focus on the website.
In the same way, how does my credit card company get me to go paperless? They hound me and hound me and hound me until I respond.
Right.
But I mean, if you sent a resident card to everybody that said, I prefer to be reached by email, here's my email address, I'll check Facebook, I prefer updates, or mail me my forms.
So what are you saying, that we're going to send somebody an email every time I think people should be responsible for.
No,
We-
but I'm
we-
just-
our
If they
website
do
has
email, they can go to the website.
Right, our website has the ability to email people for updates and agendas and so forth, but I don't think we're planning on traditionally mailing people information about the town activities in
Well,
terms of.
I know a big part of that population that's not online, obviously, is the seniors, and you do always have your column in the senior newsletter.
Messenger.
Messenger, yeah.
I mean, if your goal for a communication enhancement plan is step one, rebuild the website, okay?
But I don't know where you want to go with that. I mean, there's been talk about, well, gee, why don't I have a monthly newsletter that's online? Well, it's the same thing. What if people aren't online? How do you reach people who aren't on a device or a computer? If they're not, also the newspaper circulation is diminishing. We're certainly not going to do mail other than mailing, recycling newsletter once a year, or your tax bills 4 times a year. I don't know how do you engage people who aren't looking to be engaged.
Maybe through the town meeting reps or something like that, personally.
But I mean, are we going to go knocking door to door like,
Maybe.
hello, I'm your town
Maybe they want to feel as though it's you
Well-
look at every committee and it's just a lot of them are the same names, and I'm not saying that for any other particular reason, except it's a fact. I mean, and maybe they feel like, there's no sense in fighting City Hall, so to speak. I'm just saying that's the way it is. I'm not saying in this particular town, I'm saying anyway, it's probably that way, but maybe show.
I mean, if you,
People want to be town meeting reps, so what's a couple more days than a year? You get, 18 in a precinct, so you get, you take, 100 people apiece or something, which is probably 2 or 3 of them are in the same household.
George,
so
you're talking community activism.
Amen.
but if you go back to the report we did in the previous tab, item 6, development, it says expectations, research municipal websites and recommend implementing websites with improvements, continue effort to improve community outreach efforts by utilizing social media, local news resources, and any of the methods to provide our residents with up-to-date information, announcements, survey residents to find out how they get info, link to CTM and Facebook. I mean, there was more than just, I think the goal was more than just,
What else?
but maybe step one is the website,
Right, but all those other things pivot around the website, other than the survey.
Right.
Yep.
But I
You want a
think we
survey?
do need to figure out how else to reach people. I mean, and if some people say, I only check my snail mail, then maybe.
But then what do we do with that? We're not going to snail mail people. No, and again, and maybe it's just coming across in the multiple goals. I'm trying to attain goals that are obtainable. And if we go out there and find out that 13% of the residents want to be reached by mail, well, fine, but what do I do with that information? Because we're not going to do anything with that information, because we're not going to mail 13% of the population. So I don't mean to be cutting it to the chase, but I'm trying to get.
Well, we're having the
Avenues that are-
conversation because when we first talked about this objective, there were 2 things we talked about. Survey the community for how they prefer to be, for how they prefer their communications, because we did have people concerned that they're not online. And the second part was focused initially on the website.
Okay, so then.
That's the only reason this is coming up now, Paul, is because it was something
But
we
I'm trying to
talked
figure out what
about.
we do with the results. In other words, nothing more aggravating to people than do a survey and then
do
nothing comes of it.
Right.
And so I guess the question is if I do a survey, what do I do with the results? Because, and that's what I'm getting at, how do people want to be contacted? Unless they want to be contacted by some form of electronic communication,
It's not
or
gonna
putting
happen.
it's.
Well, I guess
or
it really
putting
depends
ban-
what you're trying to contact them with, because I do love getting my paper recycling booklet. That goes in a drawer in my house so that I can open that whenever I need it. And I don't want to go looking on the internet for that,
Right.
because with our website, I won't find it.
Right.
But if it's traffic is closed on Route 4, I don't need snail mail for that.
Right.
So I guess it depends
Right.
what the piece of information is
Right.
and the timeliness of it. If I want to know the dates that we're voting this year, maybe that is a mailer. But
But how do we find that out?
I agree, but that's what we're trying to do, is figure out how to communicate better with the public. So
For
No,
major
but
events.
we're talking about forms of communication,
Right.
right? I mean,
I have to wonder if a mailer a couple times a year wouldn't be worth it if we could get some more engagement and participation.
And what would be in that mailer?
Hi, town meeting's coming up. You can attend an informative session the Wednesday before, or, vote. Here are the major topics on the ballot. You've got all of our reps running again. Yeah, I mean, I know some of them run unopposed every single time.
I guess, and maybe I'm tired because of the time change, but if somebody
We're all
drives,
tired.
if somebody drives through town and sees all these signs on people's lawns about planning board and board of selectmen, doesn't it occur to the person that, gee, maybe there's an election going on?
Sandwich board to say election.
And we have election signs going on, and we have,
You'd be
we have
surprised.
well, then if that's the case,
There was Facebook chatter after the last election. Somebody was posting that why didn't the town tell us the date of the election? I had the same thought. There's signs all over the place, but
Well, then
people
shame on
communicate different ways.
but again, I guess it's sort of like, we're the nanny state. So we're now going to basically, to the point of, we're going to go over the edge
I
with
agree.
limited resources to
I
engage people.
totally get that. We're also looking at me at almost 42 being one of the last classes that actually had civics.
Yeah.
So we have a multi-decade gap of civics instruction
Yeah.
because the people who were writing curriculum decided that the kids didn't need to know how the government worked. So now you've got adults who don't know how anything works. And I wonder if at some point having, some of these informational nights in the library, putting things, like there used to be bulletin boards at the grocery store. I think there still are. I just wonder if you can't get some flyers out and get informative sessions a few times a year on different topics. Like, can we leverage the library?
But Emily, we did this. The previous boards of selectmen, and Pat and George can attest, we held public input sessions, right? Over at the Chelmsford Center for the Arts, and what was our attendance at those?
The last one, I think we
Less-
had 2 people.
Less than you could count with the fingers on one hand. So again, I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm just, I guess I'm trying to devote limited
do?
resources to outcomes. And I guess if I'm going to survey people, I got to figure out what it is I'm going to survey for them, other than sending them a letter saying, do you know where the town offices is located? We're at 50 Billerica Road. If you want to understand how your town government works, come call this number or come visit us. I mean, to me, it's almost insulting, I guess, in that sense, to the point where, someone, and then people are going to come in here and raise concerns about why we waste the limited taxpayer dollars on what they are considered to be unnecessary avenues. I mean, I don't know. I'm just trying to search for an identifiable problem and
Do
one
we
that we can identify
Do
and
we do
address.
voter registration drives with enough advance notice so that we can actually make the voter registration deadlines? Do we, and those are things you can put up signs for around town. You can put, stacks of voter registration papers in public areas. You can do that. You can create small things. You can have.
So again, how does a survey of residents help me with that? Saying that we should be putting out stacks of papers and sandwich boards? We already do that.
Do you?
Yes, if you go to the library, they have all those in the Secretary of State's booklets that he mails out for the elections are all at all the libraries, right? The post offices. I mean, I know they promote and they put in the paper, voter in on the website, the deadlines for voter registration.
I think,
for
so one of the informational points you could use would be intersections and signs on sandwich boards. Somebody commented.
We're already getting complaints about signage, and people who go on Facebook saying they didn't know, shame on them because they have the electronic connectivity. I answer the phones every day with the support services coordinator. When we had a partnership with Homeworks, and they were using a third-party mailing service, sending out a letter with the town seal. I was getting regular complaints, why are we wasting money on unnecessary mailings? We weren't even paying for it. It was the company we partnered with. People did not like the town spending money on mass mailings. I mean, it is a kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't, a lot of these things. I went to a seminar last week on multi-generational communities and how do you communicate with them. Clearly, one generation lives on the phone. Other people use the internet. Some use different forms of social media. We can't afford to be on all of these. We leverage certain technologies right now. We use a push technology off of our website. When we update things, we only post out to Twitter and Facebook. But we have a cap on that. If we start pushing too many things a day, we have to pay more money. If we add other social platforms, we have to do that. And then there are costs on top of that if we're looking at archiving some of these things. There's an exponential amount of money that you have to spend each time you add different social media platforms on these things. It may not be huge money, but you have to scale with all of these things. So everything you ask for, there's going to be somebody who has to monitor it. I mean, we don't have a dedicated person monitoring all of these forms right now. Oftentimes, it's one or two of us in the office that if something comes up of great import, we put it on our news flash, which pushes out. Otherwise, we have to manually put those up. We try to avoid a lot of manual postings out there because if then there are questions, we have to then continue to monitor and respond. We don't have a chief information officer, which some communities do, which would be an added cost, probably of close to $100,000 with benefits. So if, I'm just not to necessarily bolster what the manager said, but it's somebody who's taking care of some of these issues on a day-to-day basis. I'm just letting you know that there are people that are upset with everything that we do. There's always going to be a certain segment of the population who does not like what we're doing. If we're spending money on a mailing, if we're using a different platform, if we're going to, put an extra website out there, we're going to get feedback, positive and negative.
Maybe an alternate approach, if the website is really where our energy and our limited resources need to be focused now, maybe an alternate approach would be when that's ready for launch, there's a little colored card or something that goes out with the property tax bills that says, hey, we just launched a new website for the town. This is the main source for communicating what's happening. If we can be of assistance with you, please contact the town offices. And then the people who don't have online access, if they want to come forward and say, I need an alternate way, then you work with them individually.
And even on that card, you could put
Right.
sign up for push emails out.
Right.
So they at least get on.
Did you know you can sign up for notifications? And did you know there's going to be a town manager monthly blurb or whatever is going to be on there? Just some quick card that raises awareness and then provides the option for people who that's not going to work for to call the offices and say, well, what other alternatives do I have?
So just some thoughts.
Right. Just maybe that's
Yeah.
rather than creating a lot of work with the survey, maybe that's a better.
I am.
Okay, the next goal was to communicate with the residents and state on traffic concerns across the town with considerations for more formalized and routine communications, allowing public input and coordinating communications on the status of issues. Again, you had a traffic input session on June 12th. We've addressed many of those as described in the report that Michael presented earlier this evening. As Michael noted, we have formed another working group. This is the Traffic Safety Advisory Committee, and as Michael noted, it's Assistant Public Works Director Steve Yonley, Michael McCall, Public Works Director Gary Persichetti, Chief Ryan, and Chief Spinney. And again, we'll keep that active and keep bringing updates to you. You had mentioned at one point, if you wish to have another formalized traffic session, let us know, and we'll schedule it and so forth. But at this point, we'll keep moving on the issues that we've identified and brought to you already. The next one was the 2020 census, identify and execute measures to assure maximum participation in the 2020 census. Again, we got a working group here of Town Clerk Patricia Duras, Town Resident U.S. Census Employee Michael Kwolek, 2010 Census Committee member Mike Rigney, and Board of Selectmen Vice Chair Pat Wojcik, who's also on the 2020 Census Committee. We've met, we're meeting almost monthly as well, and we're utilizing the following means to promote awareness participation in the 2020 census: social media, cable access, flyers, signs, and other display materials, town bills and other mailings, schools, local political committees, faith community, and other community-based organizations. So again, I think we'll just keep this added, and obviously, this big push will come in after we turn the calendar onto the new year. The next one is the town manager's current revenue source. Review the town's current revenue source to include taxes, local receipts, state fees, state aid, and grants with consideration to priorities or additional ways to grow the town's revenues. We presented a review and market comparison of Board of License fees back in September. We've kept you informed regarding the proposed legislative changes to the state's education funding law. We've sought and secured earmark funding in the state's fiscal year 20 operating budget. I'm also seeking additional funding in the state supplemental budget. That's currently underway right now. It's at conference committee. In there right now is an additional $100,000 request for additional economic development funding. Representative Golden has secured that through the House version. On the Senate side, I asked Senator Barrett to put an earmark for $100,000 for the revitalization and renovation of Varney Playground. That did not survive the Senate process. So those are the efforts that we're doing. I guess I'm a little unsure of what was on this goals sheet, where there's this parenthesis that says less reliance on property tax. I don't know where that comes from or what that means, because it wasn't in the stated goal, but I noticed it just showed up in this document that was updated this evening.
Is it in the gray?
So I just don't understand I don't understand
Would have been one of your edits.
what that means.
I don't think, it was, probably came from somebody from that night that we discussed it, or
Right.
somewhere.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and watch the
Okay.
meeting to see who.
I
Okay.
don't think we can do a tax code overhaul.
No.
And actually
Yeah,
have
yeah,
progressive
exactly.
taxes
That's what I
in
was-
Chelmsford that
Okay.
are not, yeah.
Paul, I'm curious though, you didn't do one of these for us last year, like a mid-year sort of, here are my goals.
I don't recall, no.
Yeah, because this is my third go-around, and I don't remember ever seeing you do this.
No, given the,
Well, in past years, he's only had like 2 or 3 goals, and
Yeah.
a lot of them were ongoing anyway, so we would get a regular-
clearly things have been revamped. I never had this type of a document and this type of specificity and so forth, and I thought the best way to respond to that was to provide this type of an update. My intent is to provide another one, after the first of the year, and then a final one in the
Okay.
spring.
Fair enough.
But like I said, this process seems to be evolving. So that's the status report on goals. Quickly, we can get through some of these other ones. Town meeting is concluded. On there was the approved vote to submit the home rule petition for the charter change regarding the select board. I need a vote from this board to submit that. I mean, town meeting authorized you to do it, and I need this board to make a motion to submit the home rule petition that was approved by town meeting.
I'll make a motion to direct the town manager to submit a home rule petition to the state legislature to amend the town charter to change the name of the Board of Selectmen to the Select Board.
A second?
Paul, how long do you think this will take?
I'm hoping it shouldn't take. In theory, it shouldn't take long. What we've found is these things tend to lag. Fortunately, in other words, you may not see this until next July.
What Ken wants to know is, does he
Yeah.
have to buy new signs for?
I doubt it. I doubt it'll be done. I doubt that it'll be done in time for a spring election.
Good. We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
All right. Okay.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Next item is the set date for the December meeting of the Board of Selectmen, School Committee, and Finance Committee regarding the town's fiscal year '21 budget. The date I've suggested is Monday, December 9th at 7 p.m. I have reached out to the School Committee and Finance Committee. The Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Lang, indicated that the School Committee was available on Monday, December 9th, and Chairman Clancy indicated that 6 out of the 7 Finance Committee members are available on Monday, December 9th at 7 p.m. at the school administrative offices. And again, that will sort of be a touch point for the fiscal '21 budget.
And just to be clear, we don't have any more, there's no Board of Selectmen meeting the rest of November?
No, we have one in 2
more?
weeks, the
2
18th.
weeks.
Then you meet December 2nd.
Yep.
So 2 weeks from now, on the 18th, you'll do the audit and tax classification hearing.
Yep.
December 2nd, you'll vote the tax classification. And then you meet December 16th is the final meeting in December.
All right.
So this would be that Monday in between the 2nd and,
Yep. Okay.
and the 16th. And then you would be off until 2020 calendar year. All right, so I'm not hearing any concerns with that date. Okay, thank you. Next date is the Roberts Field Master Plan Traffic Study Update. I received this document last week or so, within the last 2 weeks, from Bill Askenberg. I asked him if he wanted to come and present the report to the board. He said no. So I'll just summarize it. Basically, it's a update to the 2017 master plan for Roberts Field. There are 98 parking spaces at Roberts Field. They've done traffic counts on the parking lot usage with the new playground. There's obviously been an over 300% increase. So out of that 98 space parking lot, there have been an average of 43 vehicles per day. Back before the playground was renovated, it's now up to 173 vehicles per day. Monday, Saturday, and Sunday are the most popular days. 11 a.m. is the most frequented time. Afternoons are most popular, with mornings following that. And you can see the highest number of cars in the parking lot are only about half capacity, even at those peak times. So again, he provides the data. We're obviously now going to the next phase of updating the ball fields. The good thing is it doesn't appear to present a conflict with the baseball field usage, because their peak times are weeknight practices, and Saturday games obviously would have somewhat of an impact. Lacrosse coordinates with the baseball, for the activities in terms of parking, and so the sense is that the existing parking inventory of 98 may accommodate new demand, with exceptions during busy periods. So
Does this address at all the handicap parking
Yeah,
considerations?
that-
I know I saw 2 and 2, but is that enough?
Yeah, I believe it is enough. We're get DPW out there to appropriately sign and mark those spaces is sort of the next
And
thing.
are they
to look at.
What
accessible?
about the
Because-
overall
I
accessibility?
believe they are accessible.
No, I mean, the accessibility to the park, which was one of the concerns brought up at the town
You
meeting.
can't bring a wheelchair up
The-
there.
the new-
Apparently, there are
the
boulders in the way.
plans that DPW
I think the
had.
hill's steep. I think I walked it. I think you get an okay shot, but I think it's steep. So I think the 4 parking spaces should be up in the upper lot, not the 2 in the lower.
That was one concern. The other concern was the layout of the actual modifications to the park itself did not, the concern was whether that was ADA compliant and whether there was handicapped accessibility once you're in the park. Or are you wheeling a chair across a field,
Well, that
for
I don't
example?
know, but I do know
So-
because the park itself can take wheelchairs on a lot, so, you know, there's one ride in particular that is, you roll the wheelchair, and I watched somebody actually roll a wheelchair up onto it and let her son do the ride. I didn't see how she got there, but I think
It's an all-inclusive.
it's an all-inclusive playground, so that
It should be accessible.
yeah.
This was the, am I in the right place? Where we're redoing the ball fields?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the comment, the concern that was raised at town meeting was on that specific plan, that it wasn't handicapped accessible to get to the ball fields.
Oh, to get to the ball fields.
Yes, not the playground.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think I think too, where the ball fields are right now, there are no, you're going across grass. There are no,
Right, and I think the comment was if we're gonna be doing something to the park proactively, why aren't we proactively making it handicapped accessible?
Yeah.
You have the
in
perimeter trail.
process?
I mean, that's part of the state grant money would have the perimeter trail, which, but I mean, you're, I'll inquire about
Can
it.
we
Ask
take a
Bill.
Yeah,
look
I'll
at
look
it
at it,
and
yeah.
just
because
see if we're
he's
compliant?
put so much thought into that playground and making
Yeah.
it so inclusive.
Yeah.
I'm surprised that there might be an issue there with ADA compliance, so I would just ask
Okay.
Bill.
All right, we'll check with the,
Thank you.
okay. Next item I have for information is on sewer capacity. This came up as part of the update to the master plan. We have obtained data from Public Works regarding the sewer capacity across the community, and we've reached our permitted sewer capacity at the Greater Lowell wastewater treatment plant. What's going on now actively, and I just want to keep you up to date, is the wastewater treatment plant itself has the ability to process additional sewer flow above its licensed 32 million gallons per day, and the city of Lowell is appealing that limit. And that's important because the town of Tingsboro is seeking additional sewer capacity for treatment beyond what it sends through us and through Drake it to the plant. And obviously, the town of Chelmsford would seek additional sewer treatment capacity. This has nothing to do with the combined sewer outflows. This is just in terms of a steady state, in terms of the capacity of the plant. And again, you've got data from fiscal years 15 to 19, where you can see that we've increased from 84% of flow to basically full capacity. And then obviously there are more projects coming online that are permitted. So I just wanted to make you aware of this formally, because I'm sure word is already out informally, that we're continuing our efforts to obtain additional sewer capacity. And also at the same time, the town has to extend and possibly amend its sewer flow agreement with the town of Tingsboro, because they're looking at which side of the river they're sending flow to and their redevelopment. So they've had discussions with us. In fact, a study was completed that showed that if Tingsboro wishes to extend its capacity through Chelmsford, that the pipes that exist out there from Tingsboro, you'd probably need about $5 million of upgrades just to basically widen those pipes. You'd also have to do some work at the Southwell plant in terms of the motors and stuff that are there to handle the additional flow. So I just want the board to be aware and the community to be aware that we're actively exploring a variety of sewer issues out there in terms of the future growth of Chelmsford, Tingsboro, and basically practically the Greater Lowell region.
What happens if Lowell increases?
Same thing.
Capacity
Yeah,
big, like the Hamilton Canal? What
Exactly.
happens if they do that?
Right, I'm not aware of their capacity numbers, but again, you've got a governor who's actively promoting additional, housing supply, and the question that I think people coming back to is saying, okay, Governor, where's the infrastructure to do this in terms of water, wastewater, and so forth? And we just haven't seen that information, but it's real.
Who would be responsible for that $5 million? That's for the Tingsboro?
No, that would be Tingsboro. and they may be able to get it through a Mass Works grant or one of those type of things, but the bottom line is, there's, there,
You should be getting federal help
Right.
because one of the biggest developers
Right.
out there is kind of.
right. At one point, Chelmsford had capacity that it offered to Westford and then sold to Tingsboro.
Yeah.
It was based on some model. Obviously, again, here we are in the
There
year.
was a big beef between Chelmsford and Westford, so they
Right.
took it and
Right.
moved it up there.
Right, so now in the year 2020, it appears that the modeling didn't, is different than what it is today, and because, under whatever build-out scenarios that took place there. So I just wanted the board to be aware of that, and we'll keep you updated as this develops. And then the last one, in terms of more good news, in solid waste disposal costs, if you just Google solid waste disposal in Massachusetts, you see stories across the Commonwealth. There's limited and declining landfill capacity, and in the Massachusetts and the New England region. And what you're basically seeing is extraordinary price increases in tipping to dispose of solid waste from the $70 per ton to the 90s. We've seen, we, for example, Nick Parley, who was our solid waste coordinator, who's now performing similar work in Winchester. He's informed me their community just had the same experience where they were paying in the 60s and their new contract is in the 90s. I mean, for the town of Chelmsford, that's $200,000 budgetary impact. And the question then becomes, where does it go from there? Because we've sort of been adjusting in recent years with the problem of where do you put recyclable materials. Now you got a question of where do you put your solid waste? And the only method that seems to be out there, the state has for comment, available for comment, if you go to the state's website, is they've got comment on their 2030 state solid waste master plan. And it calls for additional recycling, composting, continued solid waste reduction. However, the state acknowledges that they haven't met the targets in the 2020 master plan in terms of reductions in waste stream and so forth. And the theme that's out there now is we'll ship it out by rail or truck to Ohio, Pennsylvania, what have you. The problem is the costs to do that aren't any less at this point. So again, there's been a coalition of 7 communities who've always been tied in terms of, having purchasing authority and power with, the 2 facilities in our area, which are the Wheelabrator one in North Andover and the Covanta one in Haverhill. Wheelabrator isn't pursuing any additional municipal contracts because they don't have the capacity. And the Haverhill one is seeking a renewal, but they're offering renewal terms in the mid-90s. So anyway, that's not good news, but I wanted you to be aware of what's going on with
They
solid
giving out
waste.
permits for trash to energy plants? And
No,
things like
the state
that?
is not licensing any trash to energy plants, and they're not permitting new, because it's the same thing. Nobody wants a landfill
Yeah.
or a trash to energy plant in their community or their neighborhood of a
You
community.
could turn that generator into electricity and everything else.
Yep, it's and the cost and the time that it would take to permit and build those things, it's gonna be immediate. So that's the last thing I have under my report.
Is there a way to compost, like townwide? Check with some of the local composting companies. I know there's one called Offbeat Composting.
Well, the big thing they're trying to do is take food compost out.
Yeah.
The problem with that is that would mean another collection activity. We pick up solid waste, we pick up recycling. Now you'd have to have another vehicle to pick up food compost, and then you have to have a place to bring it.
Well, with our 1 acre lots, we got space for, composting.
Oh yeah, we can do.
bins
Yeah,
on-
we
I
keep
mean,
promoting home composting. I thought you meant some type of a
Well,
bulk
yeah, I mean, like,
composting.
can we look into it to see what the cost would be and if that would offset enough of the solid
Yeah.
waste? But I mean, also, there would be another great opportunity for community education, or when we sell our rain barrels, can we sell compost bins?
We have in the past.
At a reduced
know.
rate and
bought mine.
encourage some,
A bio ball.
you
We
know.
try. I mean, it's the same thing going back to the sewer thing. The other way of doing it is reducing your flow, we're exploring about whether, we do another thing with the water district about low flow, shower devices and toilets and so forth. But
Those
we
are
think
pretty
those are standard now. Exactly. That market is
It's mainly
fast.
like, are you taking a 20-minute shower?
Right.
Like,
Could be my son's fault.
Anyway, I just have one appointment for you. It's the Energy Conservation Committee at Tom Amaro for a 3-year term expiring June 30th, 2022.
Make a motion that we approve the town manager's appointment of Tom Amaro to the Energy Conservation Committee.
A second.
Motion and second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Looks like a hot tub.
Bring us home, Pat. Bring us home.
Make a motion that we approve the regular meeting minutes from October 21st as presented.
I second.
Motion second, all in favor?
Aye.
Abstain.
Yes.
Aye.
Aye.
Absent.
Make a motion that we approve and release the executive session meeting minutes for October 21st.
Second.
Motion second, all in favor?
Abstain.
Aye.
Aye.
And I'll make a motion that we approve the meeting minutes for October 24th.
Second.
Motion second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, liaison reports. Who wants to start?
Sure. The Capital Committee is going to be meeting for its planning for this fiscal year, November 14th, 21st, and December 5th, with December 12th as a backup date for snow days. And the school committee will be having a second public input session for the update of their planning on December 10th. And we'd also like to congratulate Colby Morrill, who had his Eagle Scout Court of Honor in October. And Colby's Eagle Scout project was to build a shed for the recess equipment at McCarthy Middle School. So congratulations and thank you.
Pat?
I just have one. A couple of weeks ago, I attended the Police Academy graduation, and there were two local graduates. I'm only going to mention one because I think somebody else at this table will mention
No,
the
you
other.
can go ahead and mention both.
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay, Steve. So congratulations to Steve Buckley and Sean LaFave. They've both joined the force, and you'll see them out on patrol very soon.
George?
I'm all set, thanks.
Emily?
The Stormwater Mitigation Committee is meeting next Tuesday, the 12th at 7 p.m. It's pretty interesting to see where your stormwater goes and what the plan is. Like, I find it interesting. It's fun to see where it goes. So if you're curious, you know.
Okay. And with that, do we have any press questions? I know.
We miss you, Alana, if you can hear us.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Third.
Aye.